friend of mine, Jack, was there in Honolulu at a business conference, and he had left his hotel early to go walk along Waikiki Beach. His brother Rex called him after the alarm went out and told him he needed to get back to the hotel right away. Rex later said that Jack just kind of laughed and replied, "Why? I might as well stay here." My Marine friends were going wild on social media. I believe there was some kind of lockdown issued on all the bases. I wasn't on the island at the time, having left a few years earlier, but knowing how Marines are, if they were locked down in their barracks, my guess is that most of them started drinking early that day. But here's the thing, Hawaii wasn't in danger. There wasn't a missile or meteor or any threat whatsoever. Turns out it was just a big mix-up, a simple miscommunication during what was supposed to be a routine test of Hawaii's emergency alert system. With all the recent tensions between North Korea and the United States at the time, you can't blame people for thinking World War III had finally kicked off. But they were wrong. It was just a massive screw-up that, with the help of social media, spread panic and confusion all over the Hawaiian Islands and beyond. And as expected, people were pissed. Now, looking back, everyone kind of laughed it off. A lot of memes got passed around with images of a mushroom cloud over Honolulu, but at the time the alarms were going off, everyone was legitimately freaked out. And funnily enough, this kind of thing has happened before. Except that the threat wasn't an incoming nuclear bomb. 80 years earlier, on October 30th, 1938, the day before Halloween, when many American homes still didn't have a television, thousands of people were tuning into their nightly radio programs. With the expansion of Nazi Germany happening in the late 30s and the Japanese invasions into China, Americans were aware of the growing threat of totalitarian regimes. So suffice it to say, a lot of people took it very seriously when the frantic announcers for the Columbia Broadcasting System abruptly came on the air to announce that the United States was being invaded. Listeners waited with bated breath to find out more information about the attack. Was it the Germans? Far from it. In fact, they soon realized that the invaders weren't even from this planet. This is the story of the War of the Worlds, a radio broadcast that terrified America.
Are proud to present Luke LaManna's wartime story.
Have you ever tried Googling your own name? Well, you should. I do it periodically, but the first time I did it a couple of years back, I was shocked at the amount of personal information that was publicly available about me and my family online on dozens of different sites. I've got enough to work. Let's get back. The late 1930s was an interesting time for many Americans. The economy had somewhat bounced back from the darkest days of the Great Depression, but now there was another growing sense of unease. Tensions were rising in both Europe and the Pacific, and people were paying close attention. While millions read the morning papers over breakfast, millions more were tuning into news broadcasts on a nightly basis, keeping up to date with current events through their radio sets. From their living rooms, they listened anxiously as the Japanese launched their second invasion of China in 1937. Then, as the summer turned to autumn in 1938, it looked as if Nazi Germany was preparing to invade Czechoslovakia. Families huddled around their home radios, listening for any breaking developments. For weeks, negotiators from Britain and France were attempting to appease Hitler in hopes of avoiding another global war. And on September 30th, 1938, it seemed they finally had. It was announced that Britain, France, Germany, and Italy had signed off on the Munich Agreement. Czechoslovakia was forced to hand over large amounts of territory, but war, for the moment, had been avoided. The British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, even declared that they had secured peace in our time. While many people hoped that the Munich Agreement would ensure continued peace in Europe, Many more were unsure if Hitler would respect the terms of the treaty. Even so, despite the growing anxiety over world events, there was something in the air on the evening of October 30th, 1938, a buzz of excitement. It was the night before Halloween, and all across the country, people were getting into the spirit of the holiday. It was also a Sunday night. With work and school the next morning, most families had settled in for a quiet evening at home, ready to unwind with some good old-fashioned radio entertainment.
Take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you will be entertained by the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
While radio was fast becoming the go-to source for breaking news in the late 1930s, this wasn't called the golden age of radio for nothing. Stations like CBS, NBC, and MBS also offered listeners a wide array of entertainment programs. Some of the best listening you can still find even today. Everything from live comedy and musical performances to children's shows, talk shows, and dramatic stories. Fibber McGee and Molly, The Aldrich Family, Archie, Lights Out, The Lone Ranger, and one of my all-time favorites, The Shadow. One of the most popular shows at the time was The Chase and Sanborn Hour, a live comedy and variety show hosted by ventriloquist Edgar Bergen. The show aired every Sunday at 8 p.m. on NBC, and the evening of October 30th was no different. As Bergen took the show to its first commercial break, with advertisers promoting their preferred brands of tobacco, tires, and blue coal, a lot of listeners did what people still do today during ads. They started scrolling through the other channels to see what else was playing. Many of them landed on CBS, where a live broadcast was already underway from the Meridian Room of New York City's Hotel Park Plaza. The program featured composer Raymond Raquello and his big band orchestra as they kicked off the evening with some upbeat melodies. Midway through the orchestral performance, the CBS broadcast launched into a series of breaking news updates. A Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory near Chicago, Illinois, had reported observing several explosions of blue gas on the surface of Mars. The explosions in question occurred at regular intervals and were thought to be the result of hydrogen gas. Quoting the professor, the announcer described the phenomenon as a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, which was now moving towards Earth at a high velocity. This first report, while strange to some and interesting to others, was no cause for alarm. The news update ended, and listeners were quickly returned to the scheduled program of music. But this only continued for a short moment before the broadcast cut out once again. The second interruption alerted listeners that CBS was receiving another update, this time from the Princeton Observatory in New Jersey. CBS correspondent Carl Phillips was reporting live from the observatory, speaking with world-famous astronomer Professor Pearson. Looking through the observatory's telescope, Pearson also described a strange series of explosions happening on the surface of Mars. Phillips probed him with questions, ultimately inferring that these explosions might be a sign of living intelligence. Pearson wasn't sure what they were seeing, but he was quick to say that the odds of life existing on Mars were 1,000 to 1. Phillips then asked Pearson about the distance between Earth and Mars, to which Pearson calmly replied that Mars was about 40 million miles away. Well, said Phillips, that seems a safe enough distance. The interview was then cut off. There was a brief silence hanging over the airwaves for a few seconds before the voice of Carl Phillips returned. message. He then asked the professor's permission to read it to the audience.
Quote, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Russell Brand registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Unquote.
This announcement was followed by a stunned silence before Phillips asked the question that was now on every listener's mind. Could this earthquake be connected with the strange explosions seen on the Martian surface? Professor Pearson wasn't convinced. He said it was likely just a meteor impact, and its arrival alongside the unexplained activity on Mars was likely pure coincidence. With that, Phillips signed off, returning listeners to that night's regularly scheduled musical program. Husbands and wives now sat in their living rooms, staring at the radio set with a funny expression. Children sat quietly in front of the set, looking back at their parents, waiting for them to explain what was happening. But before anyone could say "Hoot Gibson," another urgent update came through. Authorities in Trenton, New Jersey were now reporting that a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, had crashed into a farmer's field in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill. Correspondent Carl Phillips was already on his way to the scene with a mobile unit. Then, just as abruptly as before, listeners were brought back to the night's musical performance. By this point, everyone tuned into the CBS broadcast was glued to their radios, waiting in suspense for the next update. Nobody spun the dials during commercials. Nobody wanted to miss a word of the next update, which could come at any moment. And nobody was paying attention to the music anymore. Word was starting to spread fast. Listeners were calling their friends and family. Radios across America, and even Canada, were switching stations to tune into CBS, all waiting to find out what in the world was happening over in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. When Carl Phillips came back on the air, his voice was noticeably shaken and slightly difficult to hear above the din of police sirens and what was evidently an excited crowd of onlookers now gathering at Grover's Mill. Phillips attempted to describe to all the waiting listeners what they were looking at in the farmer's field.
Well, I hardly know where to begin. Painfully, your word pictures the very thing before my eyes, but nothing out of the modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me. Half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of the tree. It must have struck on its way down. But I can see the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. At least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. Has a diameter of, what would you say, Professor Pearson?
What's that?
What would you say, what's the diameter of this?
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards.
After a brief interview with the man who witnessed the arrival of the object, Phillips drew attention to a series of strange humming and scraping sounds. They seemed to be coming from inside a cylinder, which listeners could also faintly hear through his microphone. When asking Professor Pearson about the sounds, the astronomer said they could be due to the object cooling down after falling from space.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
What's the thing? The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial. Not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth and you can see its cylindrical shape.
It was here that Phillips' attention was drawn to some sort of mechanical movement coming from the cylinder. As he started reporting on this, listeners hundreds of miles away understood what was happening before anyone else did. Something was alive inside that cylinder, and it was trying to get out. With one half of the cylinder buried deep in the crater, its exposed end began to slowly rotate like a screw. Listeners at home now heard the sounds of panicked voices and the shouts of police officers trying to maintain order. Suddenly, the top of the cylinder popped loose and fell into the crater.
Take off! The top broke out there! Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone falling, someone or something. I can see coming out of that black hole two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, it might be almost, but heavens, something wriggling out out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me. I can see the thing's body now. It's large. As large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it.
As the crowd of onlookers retreated from the capsule, Phillips shouted into the microphone that he was going to find a better vantage point. The broadcast then abruptly cut out. The ominous silence, now hanging in everyone's living room, was once again broken by the rather whimsical piano music. The effect was deeply ironic. The sheer suspense and tension on the faces huddled around their radios stood in sharp contrast to the lighthearted music now filling the room. The seconds ticked by. The music was almost agonizing to listen to. Suddenly, Phillips' voice once again cut through. He sounded breathless as he described the scene around him. The group had pulled back to observe the object and its alien occupant from a safe distance, and more state police officers had arrived to take control of the situation. Cautiously advancing towards the pit were 3 policemen. Phillips told listeners that one of them was waving a small white flag in an attempt to make contact with the strange creature. It was sensational. The people of Earth were making first contact with a visitor from Mars.
Something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. Those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. Some shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against the mirror. What's that? Get the flame springing from the mirror and at least sighted the advancing men. Strike them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. There's gas tanks, the automobiles spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Oh my God.
Should we call someone?
Yes, Jerry. Call the police.
All right. Everybody just calm down. I'm sure this is just one big misunderstanding. No, Beth, sweetie, get my gun.
What do you want the gun for, Rick?
I didn't find my way across France just to get killed by some space octopus in a tin can, Jerry. If we die tonight, we die like men.
Aw, jeez, Grandpa.
By this point in the broadcast, the mood had shifted completely. Whatever the Sunday night patrons of CBS were expecting, their bewilderment was now turning into something much more serious, a full-blown panic. Telephones at local police and radio broadcasting stations were ringing off the hook. Families and friends were frantically calling each other to pass information about the invasion or to ask for it. As American homes buzzed with fear and excitement, their conversations were cut short when the CBS broadcast buzzed back to life. But this time, it wasn't Carl Phillips. This new voice didn't introduce himself, but he sounded both somber and urgent. He announced that 40 men, including reporter Carl Phillips, now lay dead on Grover's Mill. All of them burned to death by some kind of heat ray weapon.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. No one will be permitted to enter this area except by a special pass issued by state or military authorities. 4 companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton to Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. Thank you.
With a force of 7,000 troops, the state militia locked down the entire area around Grover's Mill. Broadcasting live from the militia's field headquarters, the voice of Captain Lansing of the Signal Corps kept the listening audience updated on the situation.
The cylindrical object lies in a pit directly below our position, surrounded on all sides by 8 battalions of infantry. Without heavy field pieces, but adequately armed with rifles and machine guns. All cause for alarm, if such a cause ever existed, is now entirely unjustified. Things, whatever they are, do not even venture to poke their heads above the pit. See their hiding place plainly in the glare of the searchlights here. With all their reported resources, these creatures can scarcely stand up against heavy machine gun fire. Anyway, it's an interesting outing for the troops. I can
could make out their cotton uniforms crossing back and forth in front of the lights. It looks almost like a real war. There appears to be some slight smoke in the woods bordering the Millstone River, probably fire started by campers. Well, you ought to see some action soon. One of the companies is deploying on the left flank. A quick thrust and it'll all be over. Oh, wait a minute, I see something on top of the cylinder. No, it's nothing but a shadow. Now the troops are on the edge of the Wilmot Farm. 7,000 armed men closing in on an old metal tube. A tub, rather. Well, wait, that wasn't a shadow, it's something moving. Solid metal, kind of a shield-like affair rising up out of the cylinder. Going higher and higher. But it's standing on legs, actually rearing up on a sort of metal framework. Now it's reaching above the trees and the searchlights are on it. Hold on.
Captain Lansing was suddenly cut off, the broadcast going dead once again. When the announcer finally came back, the news was grim. Emerging from the crater in a massive, three-legged machine, a single Martian had managed to nearly wipe out the entire force of 7,000 state militia soldiers, and now was on the move. As the machine cut across New Jersey, it began destroying railroad tracks and power lines with its heat ray, disrupting communications and troop movements all over the state. With the broadcast continuing to provide updates to listeners at home, the scene painted by the CBS announcer was bleak. Highways were becoming jammed with panicked mobs attempting to flee the Martian advance. Martial law was declared across New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania, and the invasion was only mounting. More and more cylinders were being discovered all over the eastern seaboard, their tripod fighting vehicles now emerging to join in the destruction. Nearby observatories were reporting that more explosions were being seen on the Martian surface. As the situation escalated, the Secretary of the Interior himself joined the broadcast, speaking live from Washington, D.C. He urged listeners to stay calm, but also emphasized the urgent need for action against the Martian threat. By this point, as many as 2 million people had tuned in from across the country, and while listeners were becoming more and more frantic, one thing was clear: calm was no longer an option. An alien invasion of America, perhaps the entire world, was underway. After the devastating loss at Grover's Mill, military forces scrambled to mount a defense against the advancing Martians. A number of the enemy machines had since linked up and were now marching across New Jersey, heading straight for New York City. If they weren't already scrambling to find shelter and load their guns, listeners tuned into the broadcast were on the edge of their seats as the report about the soldiers making a desperate stand crackled through their sets. The battle was brutal, and it was clear from the start that the odds were stacked in favor of the aliens. Artillery gunners choked to death live on air as they were overcome by toxic black gas deployed by the Martians, while a squadron of Army bombers was knocked out of the sky during an attack on one of the enemy machines. Against all odds, one Martian war machine was finally destroyed, but only at great cost. A squadron leader had flown his burning aircraft directly at the enemy, killing himself and his crew. It was a small victory. The Martians seemed unstoppable as they continued to smash through every line of defense. And it wasn't long before they were standing on the banks of the Hudson River, the New York City skyline just a short distance away.
Imagine being able to build anything just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform made for anyone with an idea and a drive to bring it to life. Describe what you want and watch it take shape. You can plan, customize, and expand.
New York Central Police Station. Can you hold, please?
Nightly radio programs. Police dispatch.
Ma'am, please, slow down. I can assure you there's no gas attack here in New York. There's no need to worry. I understand that, ma'am. Rest assured, we are trying to get to the bottom of it. I'm sure that your daughter is safe and sound, so please just remain calm. Okay, take care. My God. What is all this about Martians and gas and big walking bar stools? The phones have been going nonstop. You ever seen anything like this, sir?
No, I have not. This is being broadcast on what? CBS? No other stations are carrying it?
It looks that way. At least that's what folks are saying.
All right, let's get some units down to their office at 485 Madison Avenue. I think they have some explaining to do.
As listeners around the country sat glued to their radios to hear the latest news about the destruction of New York City by Martians, police dispatch centers and newspaper offices all over the states of New York and New Jersey were being overwhelmed by thousands of frantic callers. Since many of the operators picking up the phones weren't aware of the CBS broadcast, it was hard to make sense of what people were shouting about. Callers were asking how to prepare for gas attacks, evacuation protocols, the status of loved ones, and panicking about invading Martians. In the confusion, a few people calling the police even seemed to think the country was under attack by Germans. A few off-duty National Guardsmen were even reported to have rushed to their nearby armory to report for duty, asking fellow soldiers about the massacre at Grover's Hill and the ongoing fighting. Through all the confusion, one clear fact emerged. The only radio station carrying this story was CBS, with NBC and other affiliate networks airing their usual programs. It was only CBS who was reporting about the Martian attack. With thousands of people on the brink of all-out panic, the New York Police Department mustered a few units and sent them to the CBS radio studios at 485 Madison Avenue to figure out what the hell was going on.
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
And cut. Roll the commercial.
All right, that's intermission, people. Let's get refreshed. We are back on in 10.
Orson? A quick word, please.
What's the matter, Taylor? You're pale as a sheet.
Yeah, it's bad, Orson. We may have screwed up. The police are here.
The police? Well, what have I done now?
As the broadcast entered its first intermission, Orson Welles couldn't have been happier with how the night's show was coming together. It was an ambitious project, but everyone from the actors to the sound engineers and musicians was performing at the top of their game. Though only 23 years of age, Welles had already built a reputation in the New York Broadway scene as a protege and visionary storyteller, establishing himself as one of the top playwrights, directors, and actors of his time. He was so successful and popular that CBS agreed to give him his own hour in the evening lineup known as the Mercury Theater on the Air. Airing every Sunday at 8 p.m., the Mercury Theater gave Welles complete creative freedom to stage elaborate retellings of famous plays and novels. And since first airing in September 1938, the show had gone on to generate a relatively small but loyal following. After wrapping up a production of Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days on October 23rd, Welles had something special in mind for the following week's episode. It would be airing the night before Halloween, and Welles wanted to do something a little bit more scary. A production of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. When H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds first appeared in magazines in 1897, it absolutely terrified readers. Up until that point, nobody had really thought about the possibility of advanced life on other planets, let alone the idea of aliens coming to Earth and wiping out humanity. By the 1930s, Welles' story was a bona fide science fiction classic, but Orson Welles, the ambitious storyteller that he was, wanted to update the story for a modern American audience. In Welles' mind, the original novel format was a bit too dull and didn't lend itself well to a radio drama. He wanted to find a way to make it more intense. So he made some big changes. The setting changed from England to America, and working alongside writer Howard Koch and producer John Houseman, Welles restructured the story as a realistic news broadcast. They featured eyewitness reports, sound effects, live updates from the front lines, and referenced real locations and institutions, all to make the Martian invasion feel as authentic as possible. When an early draft of the script was sent to CBS executive producer Davidson Taylor, he was a little bit concerned. He liked the idea of a fake radio broadcast, but the way it came off was almost a little too real. At his suggestion, the writers toned down the realism by changing the names of certain organizations and locations. But as the show played out on the evening of October 30th, 1938, it looked like Taylor's concerns about the script's realism were pretty valid. The first sign that something was wrong came around the halfway point of the show. Just a few minutes before the intermission, Davidson Taylor, who was watching the production alongside John Houseman in the studio control room, was pulled away by an urgent telephone call. When he returned a few minutes later, Houseman recalled Taylor looking pale as death. Apparently, he'd just been ordered to stop the show and alert the audience that it was all a work of fiction. But as Houseman asked about what was going on, actor Ray Collins was already in the process of choking to death, live on air, on the Martian gas that, at that very moment, was supposedly flooding New York City. In what had to be one of the greatest moments in radio history, Houseman and Taylor came to the realization that people were taking their fictional radio show very seriously. Just outside the studio doors, a crowd of reporters and police officers had started gathering. The NYPD was threatening to shut down the entire broadcast. In the ensuing scuffle, the studio staff managed to keep the police at bay until 9 p.m., when the show concluded. But the second Orson Welles signed off, a mob of police officers busted through the studio doors. Confused and caught off guard by the police's entrance, Welles, Houseman, and Taylor were taken to another floor and locked in a back room. In a later interview, Houseman described the chaos that followed.
The following hours were a nightmare. The building was suddenly full of people and dark blue uniforms. Hustled out of the studio, we were locked into a small back office on another floor. Here we sat incommunicado while network employees were busily collecting, destroying, or locking up all scripts and record of the broadcast. Finally, the press was let loose upon us, ravening for horror. How many deaths had we heard of, implying they knew of thousands? What do we know of the fatal stampede in a Jersey hall, implying it was one of many? What traffic deaths? The ditches must be choked with corpses. People offing themselves. Haven't you heard about the one on Riverside Drive? It is all quite vague in my memory and quite terrible.
To say that the three men were horrified was an understatement. They couldn't understand how their radio drama managed to cause such chaos. As mandated, the Mercury Theater had announced its production of War of the Worlds 4 times over the course of the hour-long broadcast, once at the beginning, before and after the intermission, and once more at the end. It's not like they were actually trying to fool anyone into thinking it was all real. But for the many thousands who tuned in after these announcements were made, or possibly missed hearing them while they were frantically spinning the dial on their phones, the show sounded like an actual news broadcast of America being invaded. Some people who tuned in late even missed the whole Martian angle, which is why they told police they thought they were being bombed by the Germans. Paul White, then the head of CBS News, rushed to the office after hearing about the situation. It was there, in the middle of all this mayhem, that he recalled coming across Orson Welles.
The telephone switchboard, a vast sea of light, could only handle a fraction of incoming calls. The haggard Welles sat alone and despondent. "I'm through," he lamented, "washed up." I didn't bother to reply to this highly inaccurate self-appraisal. I was too busy writing explanations to put on the air, reassuring the audience that it was safe. I also answered my share of incessant telephone calls, many of them from as far away as the Pacific coast.
When the sun rose on Monday morning, Orson Welles was probably the most talked about man in America. The man himself had dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept at all that night. What between the emergency CBS press conference that followed his release from the back room, followed by an all-night rehearsal for another play that he would be performing in. Welles wasn't the only one pulling an all-nighter. Reporters were rushing to get the scoop on the story. The October 31st edition of the New York Times ultimately captured the true scale of the panic that had spread across the entire country, and even into parts of southern Canada. The article detailed how police and newspaper offices were overwhelmed with calls, how citizens reportedly fled their homes in a frenzy, the rioting in the streets, flooding of police stations, people arming themselves and creating massive traffic jams in their attempts to escape the Martians. Many even piled into churches and places of worship to pray, believing it was the end of the world. But the worst was finding out about the numerous deaths that the panic was reported to have caused. The show's news broadcast style was apparently so realistic that people were said to have collapsed from heart attacks and strokes, with thousands more being admitted to hospitals in a state of shock. Even more disturbing were the stories of people taking their own lives. Some were so terrified of being killed by the Martians that they decided to go out on their own terms. One report from the New York Times described a man in Pittsburgh who said he'd returned home during the broadcast to find his wife in the bathroom. She was holding a bottle of poison in her hand and screaming, "I'd rather die this way than like that." Once the panic died down, public fear quickly turned to public anger. This was especially directed at Orson Welles. People felt that it was cruel and irresponsible for him to portray the story in such a realistic way, especially given the wartime anxieties many Americans were already feeling. Some even went as far as complaining directly to the Federal Communications Commission, demanding for more restrictions on what could be said and done on the radio. In spite of the backlash, there were also many people who had no complaints, but in fact absolutely loved the broadcast. Not only did they applaud Welles for his visionary storytelling, but they were also strongly against the idea of censoring radio in any form. They were also baffled at how anyone could be fooled by a radio show with such an outlandish premise. One of those defenders was singer and actor Eddie Cantor, who sent a telegram to the FCC saying,
"The Mercury Theater drama was a melodramatic masterpiece. Censorship would retard radio immeasurably and produce a spineless radio theater as unbelievable as the script of The War of the Worlds."
Another letter to the commission came from J.V. Yawkey of South Dakota. He also praised Welles' show, while simultaneously poking fun at the hysterics it generated.
I suppose that by this time you have received many letters from numerous cranks and crackpots who quickly became jitterbugs during the program. I was one of the thousands who heard this program and did not jump out of the window, did not attempt to off myself, did not break my arm while beating a hasty retreat from my apartment, did not anticipate a horrible death, did not hear the Martians rapping on my chamber door, did not see the monsters landing in warlike regalia in the park across the street, but sat serenely entertained to no end by the fine portrayal of a fine play.
Then there was Mrs. Lillian Davenport of Texarkana, Texas, who wrote the FCC simply saying,
"How anyone with the intelligence above that of a 2-year-old child could be frightened by the broadcast is utterly incomprehensible."
By autumn the next year, Hitler had invaded Poland, the world was pitched into another massive war, and all complaints about the War of the Worlds broadcast were forgotten. Ultimately, the broadcast and the mayhem that it caused became the stuff of legend, but the true scale of the panic is often thought to be blown way out of proportion. While police and newspapers were actually swamped by thousands of calls in relation to the broadcast, especially in New York and New Jersey, many of the reports of mass hysteria, rioting, car wrecks, injuries, and death caused by the panic went largely unverified by the press. Despite the claims that hospitals were being flooded with casualties as a result of the show, records from those hospitals were unable to verify this, at least according to research conducted by Princeton University professor Hadley Cantrell. It is otherwise believed that the big newspapers at the time deliberately fanned the flames of misinformation to sell their own papers and to undermine the credibility of broadcast journalism. By the late 1930s, radio was rapidly becoming America's primary source for news, with nearly 27 million families across the country owning radio sets, and that number was only getting bigger. With the rise of the radio industry, millions of dollars worth of advertising revenue that once went to print journalism was now going into broadcasting. Talk about wartime stories of an unconventional kind. In what could be described as a media turf war, newspapers turned Welles's broadcast into a prime example of why radio news couldn't be trusted. But these attempts to undermine their competition were as successful as the horse dealers' attempts were to call the automobile a passing fad. There was no stopping radio, and more specifically, there was no stopping Orson Welles. The whole incident only solidified his reputation as a master storyteller. Soon after, he was signed by Hollywood's RKO Pictures, where he would go on to write, direct, and star in what many would later consider to be one of the greatest films ever made, 1941's Citizen Kane. Despite his incredible success, the War of the Worlds broadcast would shadow Wells for much of his career. When reporters would ask him about it, he would sometimes play the myths surrounding the broadcast. But it wasn't lost on him that people's fear of war around that time was very real and certainly fed into their reactions. In a 1958 BBC interview, as he reflected on the impact of the War of the Worlds broadcast and the 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor, Wells recalled the exact moment he learned that America was under attack.
I was in the midst of some hymn of praise to the American cornfields or something of the kind when suddenly a gentleman darted into the radio studio, held up his hand and said, "We interrupt this broadcast to bring you an announcement. Pearl Harbor has just been attacked." Of course, this very serious and terrible news was never believed. Not for hours by anybody in America, because they all said, "Well, there he goes again." Well, the bad taste was funny once, but not a second time.
Hey guys, thank you for sticking around for the after action here in the credits. You know, I could offer my own thoughts about the War of the Worlds broadcast, but while I still had your attention captive just for a couple of minutes, I wanted to introduce you to something that, if you haven't had an opportunity to check it out yet, you might find interesting, and I'm going to be the one to send you down this rabbit hole. I grew up without a TV, and something my parents just thought would be good for us. So it was like growing up out of time for me, because I was in the 90s as a kid, listening to old-time radio shows. That's what my parents gave me to listen to, and going out in the woods and climbing trees and playing Davy Crockett. So it was hard getting along with kids in school who were talking about all the stuff they were watching, and I was like talking about The Shadow, and yeah, they had no idea. But if you haven't checked out old-time radio yet, who knows? Maybe you'll fall in love with it like I have. There's so many great shows to listen to, and even the advertisements from 90 years ago were fun to listen to, hearing what show sponsors were promoting to their audiences in the 1930s and 40s. Just really sends you back in time when people had to heat their homes with coal furnaces, save money with war bonds, and so on. As I mentioned, one of my favorite shows was called The Shadow, a radio series about a wealthy man about town named Lamont Cranston, who, having spent years studying mysticism in the Orient, he comes back to New York and becomes a crime fighter. He uses hypnotic powers to keep people from seeing him, and is then able to become invisible and hide in the shadows. Interestingly enough, Orson Welles was the first to play the voice of the Shadow when the show aired in 1937. He was on the show for the first year, and then the last episode he worked on, Professor X, aired in September 1938. And now I know why. Orson had just started on his new show, the CBS Mercury Theater, on the air that same month, so he must have had to leave the Shadow to focus on the new show. And just a few weeks after he recorded this last Shadow episode, in September, is when the War of the Worlds broadcast happened at the end of October. Interesting piece of radio history there. I hope you enjoyed listening. Aside from old-time radio shows from the 1930s and 40s, some shows that might align with your interests, with stories about the paranormal and strange mysteries, would be X-1, I believe it was from the 1950s, CBS Radio Mystery Theater, which was the 1960s and 70s when they tried to bring radio back, which I thought they did a great job with. You can find all of these shows to listen to free online. There are also, many of them are here on YouTube. They're not hard to track down. I'll post the names of the shows in the information section of this video. A few years ago, I was driving through Washington State. Really beautiful there. The forests, the mountains. We saw Mount St. Helens for the first time. Really eerie, seeing all the old trees that got flattened when the volcano blew its top back in the 80s. That's also where I picked up one of my favorite souvenir magnets. It's the shape of Washington State with a cutout of Bigfoot in the middle. I don't do that much traveling around the US, but something that stood out to me about Washington was the amount of Sasquatch merchandise. It's everywhere. So you can't help but get the distinct impression that Washington has a lot of Bigfoot believers. I started digging into it and found out why. According to the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, Washington leads all 50 U.S. states in reported Bigfoot sightings, a total of 713 documented encounters as of December 2024, and those are just the official reports. So now we know why, even though the Army likely never made an official statement about Bigfoot's existence. There was once a point when the Army survival maps for Washington had a picture of Sasquatch on them and listed it as a dangerous animal known to live in the state, right alongside cougars, black bears, and porcupines. Someone might say, well, I've never seen one. Well, with its rugged mountains, canyons, and dense forests rarely explored by humans, Washington would be the perfect place for anything looking to stay hidden. Most people that end up seeing Bigfoot are usually the ones out hiking or camping or hunting, people who spend a lot of time out in the wilderness. Speaking of the Army, Washington also plays home to a number of U.S. military bases, and a lot of their training areas are just that, wilderness in the middle of nowhere. And wouldn't you know it, along with other veterans and soldiers in the state, even the Green Berets training in Washington have reported running into something in the woods that they wish they could forget about. This is the Smoke Pit, and these are just a few of their stories. True stories of Washington encounters with Bigfoot. Ever feel like using the internet these days is not nearly as safe as it used to be? Well, you're right, it's not. Browsing the internet without using a VPN is like leaving the curtains open in an area extremely available. Speaking of prices, I need to appeal to not. Since today's stories all take place in Washington State, it just feels wrong to not mention one of the most iconic Bigfoot encounters that people talk about. The kind of story that any red-blooded soldier stationed in Washington would keep in the back of his mind as he packed his gear and was sent out for a field op in the nearby wilderness. The story of the Battle of Ape Canyon. The name of the story itself makes it sound like a wartime anecdote, but it was as much of a battle as anyone could ask for. Ape Canyon is only about 2 miles to the east of the dormant volcano I mentioned, Mount St. Helens. Ask around, and it seems like all the people who live there have heard about the story. The story takes place just over 100 years ago, back in July of 1924, when a group of gold miners found themselves in a very hairy predicament. The story originated from a man named Fred Beck, one of the miners who was there. In 1967, he and his son Ronald published a book titled I Fought the Ape Men of Mount St. Helens, Washington. According to Fred, he and 4 other miners had been prospecting around Mount St. Helens and the Lewis River for the last 6 years. At the time the story takes place, they were hiking through the Washington forest to their usual spot, a gold mine they called the Vanderwhite Mine, located in a remote canyon near the base of the massive volcano. After years of working the area, they had become accustomed to it, but on this trek, Fred said that he and the others couldn't help shake the feeling that something was off.
Hank, you okay? What you doing out here? Shh.
You hear that?
Yeah.
Now, wait for it.
What?
They've been going back and forth like this for an hour now. One over there, talking to another, somewhere over there. And they's getting closer.
What you think they are? Coyotes? Wolves, maybe?
No.
Arriving at their usual campsite, an improvised cabin built by the men a few years earlier, Fred and the men settled in. Things were business as usual for a couple of days. But then, almost every night, the men began hearing strange noises. Fred described the sounds in his book.
We had been hearing noises in the evening for about a week. We heard a shrill, peculiar whistling each evening. We would hear it coming from one ridge, and then hear an answering whistling from another ridge. We also heard a sound, which I could best describe as a booming, thumping sound, just like something was hitting itself on its chest.
In spite of the strange sounds, and Fred suffering from a bad toothache, all in all, the men's dig was going well. Spirits were high. One day, while taking a breather from digging in the hot sun, Fred went with another guy, Hank, to fetch some water from a nearby spring. Fred had just stooped down by the water to fill his bucket when Hank yelled. Fred whipped around to see that Hank, now facing away from him, was pointing his rifle at something in the trees about 100 yards away.
Hank yelled and raised his rifle, and at that instant I saw it. It was a hairy creature. He was about 100 yards away on the other side of a little canyon, standing by a pine tree. It dodged behind the tree and poked its head out from the side of the tree. And at the same time, Hank shot. I could see the bark fly out from the tree from each of his 3 shots. The creature, I judged, had been about 7 feet tall with blackish brown hair. It disappeared from our view for a short time, but then we saw it running fast and upright about 200 yards down the little canyon. I shot 3 times before it disappeared from view.
Terrified, the 2 men quickly filled their buckets and ran, water sloshing out of them, all the way back to the cabin. It took some time to catch their breath, but once they did, they told their friends about what they'd just seen down by the creek. Fred and Hank were clearly terrified by the encounter. The other 3 agreed that they would stay one more night, and then leave the canyon the next morning and head back to town. The problem was, that would soon become the most terrifying night of their lives. Around midnight, the miners were suddenly woken up by loud banging noises against the cabin. It sounded like large rocks were being thrown at it. Sure enough, something was throwing rocks at them, big ones, big enough that they were starting to splinter the stacked logs that made up the cabin walls. The men grabbed their rifles and pistols, unsure of what to do. Going outside certainly seemed like the worst idea. The cabin didn't have any windows, but the massive rocks were starting to break open small gaps between the logs. The men used these to try to see what was outside. What they saw horrified them. Their cabin was surrounded by at least 3 large, hairy creatures standing on 2 legs. They watched the creatures moving around the cabin, picking up large boulders and hurling them towards it. Whatever these things were, they could tell they weren't human, but they seemed far more intelligent than most animals.
The only time we shot our guns that night was when the creatures were attacking our cabin. When they would quiet down for a few minutes, we would quit shooting. I told the rest of the party that maybe if they saw we were only shooting when they attacked, they might realize we were only defending ourselves. We could have had clear shots at them through the opening left by the chinking had we chosen to shoot. We did shoot, however, when they climbed up on our roof. We shot round after round through the roof. We had to brace the hewed log door with a long pole taken from the bunk bed. The creatures were pushing against it, and the whole door vibrated from the impact. We responded by firing many more rounds through the door. They pushed against the walls of the cabin as they tried to push the cabin over, but this was pretty much an impossibility. Now, Hank and I did most of the shooting. The rest of the party crowded to the far end of the cabin, guns in their hands. The attack continued the remainder of the night, with only short intervals between. The most profound and
frightening experience occurred when one of the creatures, being close to the cabin, reached an arm through the gap in the wall and grabbed one of our axes by the handle. Before the thing could pull the axe out, I turned the head of the axe upright so that it caught on the logs. And at the same time, Hank shot, barely missing my hand.
None of the men slept that night. The attacks continued until dawn. Only when it started to get light, the creatures finally appeared to leave. The men weren't sure if they would get another chance, so they took the opportunity to leave the area themselves. They thought it was best to leave most of the gear behind, since it would slow them down. Hopefully, they'd be able to come back another time and get it. But even if not, their lives were more valuable. Grabbing their weapons, after one final look through the gaps in the walls, they removed the wood brace from the door and cautiously stepped outside. But after scanning the surrounding canyon, it was Fred who saw it first, one of the creatures standing near the edge of a nearby cliff.
It was not long before I saw one of the ape-like creatures standing about 80 yards away near the edge of the canyon. I shot 3 times and it toppled over the cliff down into the gorge, some 400 feet below.
For reasons we can only guess, although completely understandable, Fred said that he and the other men all agreed to say nothing about the incident to anyone. In the end, they were so disturbed by the whole ordeal that they decided to never go back to the Vanderwhite mine. No amount of gold was worth dying for. In spite of their agreement, the story eventually got out. Frank said in his book that his friend Hank spilled the beans and reported the incident to the local park rangers. Maybe he had hoped to make sure nobody got hurt from wandering into the area themselves. But from there, things snowballed until the story of the so-called Mountain Devils was making headlines. Thousands of people flocked to what was eventually dubbed Ape Canyon from all over the country, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange creatures seen by a group of gold miners. Even a well-known big game hunter armed with an elephant gun traveled all the way from England with hopes of bagging one for his exotic collection. Despite being hounded by reporters, Fred and the other men were never known to speak openly about what had happened, at least not without a lot of persistence. Fred would eventually be goaded into leading 2 reporters and a park ranger back to the cabin site. Fred also left most of their names out of his book for their own privacy. 2 of the men's identities remain unknown. Aside from Fred's book, the only reason we do know more about the men involved is because their family members eventually came forward about the incident many years later. The names of 3 of the men are generally accepted to be Leroy Smith, Marion Smith, though it's unclear if they're related, and of course, Fred Beck. Frank later clarified that the man he referred to in his book as Hank was a pseudonym he used, since the man he was referring to was a key figure in the story, with his telling the park rangers about the story and the whole thing ending up getting out of control and being released to the public. Probably because of their unwillingness to speak about it, a lot of questions remain unanswered. In the 100 years since the Battle of Ape Canyon, the site of the encounter has changed significantly, thanks to the 1981 eruption of Mount St. Helens. However, in 2013, researcher Mark Mursell located what he believed to be the foundations of the cabin used by the miners. Ominously, Mark said that, buried in the dirt, he found numerous spent shell casings. These would match to the rifles Fred Beck said that he and Hank were carrying on the night of the attack. All of this to say, whatever we think about these creatures, based on Fred's story, it seems that they might be territorial. They can also be highly aggressive, and even gunfire might not be enough to keep them away. But unfortunately, because of the Army's safety regulations, most soldiers training in the field don't actually carry live ammunition with them. These following stories would have us wondering if the soldiers training in the woods of Washington shouldn't be given some kind of exception to this rule. This next story was shared by a soldier serving with the Green Berets, the U.S. Army's branch of SOCOM, the Special Operations Command. I never worked directly with the Green Berets. I worked on the Marine Corps side of SOCOM during my second enlistment. But of course, whether it's the Raiders, Green Berets, SEALs, or PJs, I'm sure we all talk crap about who's the toughest. But compared to conventional military forces, you can imagine that special ops guys all have a reputation for being tough as nails. deployed to Bosnia and Afghanistan and was the 18th Charlie Special Forces engineer on a team. We were doing an exercise, patrolling, reacting to contact, and breaking contact drills during PMT before we deployed to Iraq. We were in one of the really remote training areas of Fort Lewis. The whole exercise was kind of last minute, so it was all we had available. We were near the towns of Rainier and Yelm in an area called Skukachuk, super remote and basically in the shadow of Mount Rainier. At night, we would go to 33% security in our patrol base, but we kept coming into contact with something that none of us could figure out. We would see figures and shapes moving in the shadows and could hear foliage snapping. Fort Lewis is cloudy 90% of the time, so night vision goggles were practically useless, but we had them. The thermals that we had been using back then were okay, but they burned through batteries and were heavy, so we didn't take them. We left them in the arms room. At first, we thought that these noises and all this stuff going on might be local hillbillies and rednecks up to no good tracking us. I mean, a dozen full auto M4s with lasers, optics, night vision goggles, and radios is worth a lot of money. They might have been trying to steal them. Out in Washington, we knew there were bears, large cats, and other wildlife, so even though our command didn't know about it, we all carried 2 mags of unaccounted for range ammo, just in case. We had basically taken the ammo off the range when nobody was looking. But eventually, we bumped up from 33% to 50% security, so half of our guys are awake, and our team sergeant and commander decided that training was over. The liability of whatever was going on out there wasn't worth the squeeze, so to speak. Soon the order was given. Live mags were loaded, but no rounds chambered. Not yet, anyway. We started backtracking on the trail we came in on, but my senior said something was off. And then we saw them. Tracks. They were hard to make out in the dark, but they were large. And they were set deep into the mud, like whoever they belonged to was weighed down with gear. Our initial thought was that it was the locals wearing the same kind of boots as us. At this point, we were still convinced that we were dealing with sketchy hillbillies, and the thought of messing with them a little was too good to pass up. A little payback for screwing with us, you know. So we picked up a trail and started tracking them. We could smell it before we found it. This sickly sweet smell of rotten flesh, wet dog fur, and dung. Green berets are supposed to be able to handle anything. Stuff that would even make a billy goat puke, but this was rough. Me and another teammate dropped rucks and went ahead to scout, while the team set up a linear counter ambush and patrol we'd acted any differently, things could have turned out badly for both sides. This next story was found in the book Encounters in the Woods, Volume 1 by Ethan Hayes. The account, written by the son of a Marine Corps veteran, details a chilling run-in that the two had while hiking along a remote trail in Washington. It was fall, and I was hiking with my dad. I hadn't seen him in a while, and we both hadn't been out hiking in a long time. I researched some trails, looking for one that was off the beaten path. One thing I didn't want to do was get stuck behind a bunch of people or have to worry about parking. I found a spot about an hour away, a ways out from the city. The park sat on the edge of a national forest. I'd say exactly, but I don't want to spoil the place, nor do I want a group of Bigfoot people racing into the area. We set out that morning. It was cool and crisp, and according to the weather report, we were going to have clear skies to enjoy our day. We arrived at the trailhead about mid-morning and planned on making it a solid 2-hour hike. For being 68, my dad was in pretty good shape. Heck, after our first climb, I was wondering if he was in better shape than I was. My dad had been a Marine and prided himself on his fitness, and it showed. The reviews of the hiking spot were spot on. It was remote, no one to be seen, and there wasn't even a car in the parking lot. Outside of the initial climb, the first hour of the hike proved to be relatively flat and easy. We crossed over several large fields and had a forest of pines to go through before we turned to head back. When we entered the forest, the bright sunlit morning was dimmed by the shadows of the thick pine grove. We both stopped and took it all in. It was beautiful. My dad pulled out his old camera and started snapping some photos, some with me in them, some of just trees and nature and stuff. He swung his camera to the right and peered through the viewfinder. And it was then that he let out a sharp gasp. He lowered the camera and started pointing out in the woods. When he called my name, I could hear the fear in his voice. He took a few big steps backward, still pointing, and then he tripped over a fallen tree. All I heard was a loud thud and crack. I didn't see what he was looking at, but I turned just in time to see him falling onto the ground. His leg bent the wrong way, completely the wrong way, like bone jutting out and everything, and he is howling in pain. So I run over to him, and I mean, I'll admit I totally freaked out for a second. I just froze, but I got it together, and I started to perform basic first aid. I compressed the open wound. Using some cloth, I wrapped it as tightly as I could. Through his grunts of pain, my dad is asking me, "Did you see it?" I asked him what he meant, and he replied, "The monster." I didn't process what he was saying until after I finished wrapping his leg. His arms shook as he tried to sit up, and he's saying, "There, over there. I saw it standing over there." I looked to where he was pointing, and I didn't see anything but pine trees. So now my mind is racing. How am I going to get him out of there without making his leg worse? I pulled my phone out, and of course, there wasn't a signal this far out. I was so frustrated, but the situation was what it was. As my dad went on about this hairy, 7-foot-tall monster, I kind of just rolled my eyes. In my mind, my dad is clearly going into shock. I took off my backpack and pulled out a water bottle, urging him to drink and rest so I could try to think of a plan to get us out of here. But he wasn't having any of it. He just wanted to leave right away. So I made him a deal. If I went to investigate what he saw, he would take a moment to rest and get some water in him. He nodded in agreement and took the water bottle. I got up and turned to look where he saw this monster. And again, all I saw was just tall pine trees and some small saplings, which were scattered along the ground. I took a few steps, but then stopped when I heard a branch snap loudly to my left. I looked, but nothing, just more trees. I stared for a minute, ready to just write all this off, when I saw something move. At first, I thought it was the wind blowing a branch or leaves, but these were pines, and pines don't have leaves. And it was too low, down on a tree, to be a branch. I kept my eyes glued to the spot, because something was there. Something dark that was just barely sticking out from the side of the tree. My mind went into overdrive trying to think of a normal explanation, but I was starting to get worried. What could this be blowing in the breeze? Because it sure as hell looked like long hair. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and looked again. Gone. It was just gone. My heart sank, and I had this gnawing sensation starting in my gut. If it was no longer there, then whatever it was had moved. And if it had moved, then whatever it was alive. My dad called out to me, asking what I was looking at. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to admit that maybe he was right. I have always thought about myself as a science guy, and a monster in the woods, that just wasn't science. That was science fiction at best. Hell, it was pseudoscience. Dad called out to me again, but I kept my eyes fixed on the spot where I thought I saw something. And it was then that I heard my dad cry out in pain. I was about to turn my attention towards him when whatever the hell was watching us peeked out from around the tree for a split second. At the sight of it, I nearly fell over in shock. It was a face, a human-like face, but it wasn't human. It's hard to explain. It had all the features of a human face, but it simply was not human. Many of the features were larger or slightly different, and its head was elongated at the top or cone-shaped. The face had hair, and where there wasn't, the skin was grayish in color. Its eyes were large, and its nose was flat and wide. I took a few steps back, my eyes still glued on where I'd seen the face pop out, before turning back and running towards my dad. By the look on my face, he knew I'd now seen what he saw. I immediately told him that we needed to go, and even though he was in a lot of pain, he didn't argue. I squatted down, getting ready to lift him up. I wrapped one of my arms under my dad's shoulders and pressed him up until we were both standing. I told him that I would do my best, but he was going to have to hop on his good leg. As we began making our way down the trail, we heard a knocking sound behind us. We both knew what made it, and it only made us want to move faster. But that only lasted a few hops, and my dad was quickly getting worn out. I can only imagine how much pain he was in with that kind of break. Then, all of a sudden, a rock landed just feet from us. I was now tempted to just pick my dad up in a fireman's carry and haul him out. I was terrified. And now I wondered if the thing was pursuing us or just trying to get us to leave. I wanted to turn around and look back, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Just as we finally exited the woods, another rock, this one quite large, smashed through the tall grass of the field we were in. Whatever that thing was could have easily caught up with us by now, but it hadn't. I think it just wanted to scare us and make us leave. Well, message received. As we made our way further and further away from the pines, our fear began to die down. After we were a good 300 or so feet away, we stopped and caught our breath. It was at that point I looked over my shoulder and I could finally see the creature in its entirety. He was on the edge of the tree line, just in the shadows. So my hunch was correct. It seemed like it just wanted us to go away. I think we must have entered its territory and it came to check us out, and then the rocks must have been its way of warning us and telling us to leave. Thinking about bears or something, I thought maybe it had little ones around, or, this is just what it does. It's territorial. I'm probably not ever going to find out, because after we made it back to our car safely, I decided I'm never going back there. I do wonder if other people had similar encounters there, or was it just the right timing that me and my dad happened to be walking through the area when it was there. I took my dad to the hospital, and his leg is fine. He's back stronger than ever. And in fact, I'm seeing him this weekend. But this time, we're we plan on going fishing. When we think of Bigfoot, especially in the context of the Battle of Ape Canyon story, there are a variety of opinions about his temperament. Some people argue that he's a gentle giant, while others would tell you that he's as unpredictable and violent as a rabid dog. But according to this next story, shared by another anonymous U.S. Army veteran, which was also shared in Ethan Hayes' book, Bigfoot may be a little more complex than we give him credit for. You know, I've read many stories about people's encounters with Bigfoot, most of them pretty scary, even terrifying. But I've been thinking, maybe people are just scared of the unknown, or perceive the creature to be evil, when I believe it's just an animal. A curious animal, a smart one, territorial, and maybe even kind. Now, I'm not saying they can't do things which would freak you out, but I think that's just them protecting their ever-dwindling territory. Anyway, my encounter began when I was 27. I'd just gotten out of the Army, and instead of moving back home to Iowa, I decided to keep the adventure going. I moved to a little piece of land just outside of Yakima, Washington. I wanted to live off the land for a while, just to be by myself. I needed some peace and quiet to process everything I'd been through in Iraq. I rented an old trailer which sat on 5 acres. I was surrounded by woods, and I loved it. In the late spring, I spent my days preparing a garden and wandering around the area, scouting the land around me. The first time I thought something was off was when I went hiking. While exploring the woods around my place, I found some interesting tree structures. Large branches or even smaller trees uprooted and arranged, like set alongside each other like large crosses or X's. And I knew right away that these weren't created naturally. They had been intentionally made. After the first week, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying a beer. I like to sit in the dark, no real light, just the silver moon and stars above me. As I'm sipping my drink, I hear it. Someone walking slowly, deliberately through the woods, right inside the tree line near my front yard. At first I thought it could be a neighbor walking back to their house, but then I remembered that the nearest property was at least a mile away. I mean, I really didn't care, wasn't scared. I just finished my beer and went to bed. The next night I heard the same walking. But this time I called out and the walking stopped. The next day I was in the front yard near the woods and saw something odd. A stack of rocks placed on a fallen log. 4 of them stacked right on top of each other. Okay, weird. Whoever was in those woods must have done that. I laughed and went about my day. But later, when I was making dinner that night, I had an idea. A weird idea. I'd play a game. I'd leave something for whoever it was and see if they would do the same. So I grabbed a beer, took it down to the log and set it on it, and then went back to the porch and sat in the dark. About 20 minutes later, I heard the footsteps again, same as before. I said hello, asked how they were doing, and nothing else. I just waited. The next morning I was curious. I went down to the log, discovered that the beer was gone, and in its place was a series of twigs, all lined up by size. I laughed. All right, let the games begin. That night, I decided to up the ante. I put out an old medal that I'd been awarded. I was actually excited to see what would be left in exchange in the morning. Like every night before, I sat on my porch, had my beer, and listened to the walking. The next morning came, and I rushed down to find a pile of acorns. The medal was gone. I looked around to see if anyone was close by, but there was nothing. It was then I saw a footprint in some mud, and it was huge, like 14 inches and barefoot. That is when it hit me. This wasn't a person. This was a Sasquatch. I'd heard about them, of course, but I never really thought they were real. But now, I didn't know what to think. I did wonder if my neighbor was messing with me, so I paid him a visit. He was a nice older man, also an Army vet who'd served years prior in Vietnam. He said he hadn't been walking around at night behind my house, and he definitely hadn't left anything in the woods near me. I didn't go into detail, but I got the feeling that he knew what I was talking about. That he knew what or who I was dealing with. The next night came, and this time I thought about leaving some food. I cooked up some hamburgers and made one extra one for my visitor. I left it down there on the log and went back to my spot on the porch. Again, I waited. Like clockwork, walking. But this time, I could hear it walk right up to the edge of the woods where I'd left the hamburger. I tried to see it, but there wasn't enough light. But to this day, I swear I at least saw the silhouette of the creature. I was tempted to go down and have a look, but I thought it was best not to, so I just waited for morning. When morning came, I went down to find that the burger was gone, and in its place were blackberries. Dude, I laughed so loud, I was actually communicating with a Sasquatch. This back and forth continued on for weeks. I'd leave various food items, and in return, I'd get berries, acorns, and even what I think was a half-eaten squirrel. I was enjoying this and starting to contemplate if I should try to get this on film, but I decided against it. I just wanted to experience this for myself. I had an appointment at the VA, and since it was a distance to drive, I planned to stay overnight and to visit a friend. My visit ended up going beyond a day and lasted 3. It was great seeing an old army buddy, but I was looking forward to going back home. When I got back, I found that the trailer had been broken into. There were footprints all around it, and the refrigerator and pantry had been completely ransacked. At first I was pissed off, but the more I thought about it, it made sense. I had been feeding this thing, and when I stopped, it went looking for me in the food. I didn't like that it had messed up my place, but like I said, I understood it was my fault. These things, while intelligent, are just animals. I cleaned up the mess, fixed the door, and promptly went back to my nightly routine. For another 9 months, I'd leave something and would be given an item in return. I did ask it not to come back to my house. I kind of shouted at it. And you know what? It never did. I never once felt fear. Then again, I'd seen what real terror was in Iraq. So a hungry animal who was smart enough to do gifts, and for me, wasn't terrifying. I've since left the area, and I don't live there anymore, but I often wonder what happened to it, and if whoever is living there is enjoying the creature's company, like I did. Hey guys, I want to tell you about an incredible new podcast that's live right now, courtesy of my friends at Ballin Studios. And this one is a history show, but it's not one of those dusty old history shows that will put you to sleep. These stories all feel like immersive action movies. Well, action movies you listen to. And the best part is that they all dive into the moments that shaped the world we live in today. For example, why are we so obsessed with true crime stories? Wait till you hear the story from more than 100 years ago. It's not just the grisly murder, the daring escape, places the military can send you for a few years, the islands of Hawaii are hardly the least desirable. Unless you just hate the sun, beautiful sandy beaches, and rainbows. Even if you have the absolute worst job, anyone who spent their years serving on a base like 29 Palms, Minot, Polk, Drum, and so on, they're gonna roll their eyes if they hear you complain about anything. Oh yeah, Hawaii must have been real tough, sure. Granted, I will always say that the jungles I had to spend days or even weeks at a time in during my field ops were downright awful. They are hot, wet, and an absolute death trap in the middle of the night. Hawaii is beautiful if you're standing on a beach, but we spent half our time crawling onto the beaches at 3 a.m. after finning several hundred meters through the water in full gear. Wet, sandy camis chafe your inner thighs real bad. a hell of a lot more. Not to mention having to clean all that rust and mud constantly out of your rifles. We envy the guys who spent their time working in air-conditioned offices and said they loved going to the beach on the weekends. My recon platoon was honestly kind of sick of it by the time our training was over. Speaking of doing all this training at night, it's really no secret that nighttime is when the weird stuff starts happening. Hawaii, especially the island of Oahu, has long been a major hub for American military bases. As such, all manner of service personnel, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, are always awake around the clock, whether in field training out in remote areas or sitting night watch in completely empty buildings. So, who better to be the witness to strange and terrifying things that go bump in the night when everyone else is asleep? Hawaii is often regarded as a dream vacation spot, but it is first and foremost an island with a bloody military history and no shortage of paranormal activity. Before it was occupied by the U.S. military, the local natives were warring with each other, practicing their own rituals, dark magic, and supernatural whatnot. The brutal Japanese attacks on the island in 1941 left their own mark. If you pay close enough attention, you get the sense that something inherently sinister is hiding in the island's shadows. As told by those who experienced these things firsthand, this is the smoke pit. And these are just a few true stories that expose the darker side of Hawaii. December 7th, 1941 stands as one of the darkest days in American history. The Japanese Empire, looking to expand their control in the Pacific and seeing the U.S. Pacific Fleet as a threat to their ambitions, devised a plan. A surprise attack that would knock the Americans out of the war before they even had a chance to join it. In the first week of December, alongside coordinated strikes against U.S. and British bases in the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, and Hong Kong, the Japanese Naval Task Force positioned itself just a few hundred miles off the coast of Hawaii. 6 Japanese aircraft carriers and dozens of support ships transporting 353 fighters, dive, and torpedo bombers. The planes took off just before sunup on the 7th, flying toward the island of Oahu. It was a beautiful Sunday morning. Church bells were ringing. Some sailors were either sleeping in or nursing their hangovers. And then the planes started flying over. Most people thought it was just part of some kind of drill. It wasn't until the explosion started that they realized this was no exercise. The Japanese attack would last for an hour and a half. In that time, the damage they caused was devastating. All 8 of the battleships moored along Ford Island were badly damaged. After being struck by 9 consecutive torpedoes, the USS Oklahoma had completely capsized, trapping hundreds of sailors and Marines inside the hull. The USS Arizona had been sunk, with 1,177 of its crew being killed when the ship exploded. For days after the attack, frantic banging of trapped men could be heard from within the wrecks. The noises themselves traumatized the men hearing them on the outside because they could only listen, unable to cut through the thick steel bottom and rescue them. The rest of the island hadn't been spared either. Hundreds more military personnel had been killed. Every major airfield had been hit, most of the aircraft being destroyed or severely damaged before their pilots could get them off the ground. The Americans, meanwhile, had only managed to shoot down 29 of the attack receiving an average of 1.8 million visitors every year, and some of them experience more than they expected. Out of all the museums and historic World War II buildings on site, the USS Arizona Memorial is one that stands out. The battleship is sitting on the harbor floor, a corroded and metal husk of its former self visible just below the surface of the water. If you've seen it, maybe you have also contemplated the horrible reality that the remains of hundreds of its crew are still down there, trapped inside. Above the ship, the Navy has constructed a white concrete and steel structure, which can be reached by a short ferry ride, allowing visitors to view the ship from above. In 2011, an Australian woman named Suzanne Devaney visited the Arizona Memorial along with her family. Taking in the solemn beauty of the monument, Susan began snapping photos of the interior as well as the sunken ship. Her visit to the memorial was an emotional and somewhat haunting experience by itself. But unbeknownst to her, Susan had captured something even more haunting on her camera. Looking through the photos she had taken earlier in the day, while sitting in her hotel room that evening, Susan suddenly grabbed her husband's attention. What they saw on her screen was one of the photos she had taken of the Arizona, and clearly visible in the brackish green water was a face, the distinct face of a man. It was uncanny. The face appeared young. The expression was what can only be described as a look of profound sadness and anguish. After sharing the photo with her family, it was then posted online before going viral. The photo then made headlines all over the world. As is the case with all things paranormal that are ever taken seriously by reputable media outlets, the photo received both approval and skepticism. Could the face have been one more instance of pareidolia? Of course, 1.8 million people snapping photos of the same location year after year. It's bound to happen. A ripple of water just forms in such a way, the light reflecting off of it at just the right moment. In a previous episode about strange things seen on submarines, one submariner said his sub was docked in Pearl Harbor. His chief came screaming up to their compartment, saying he'd just seen a man in an outdated naval uniform walk past him. He tried to question him, and then watched the man walk right through the hull of the ship. He may not have grabbed a photo of the man's face, but we could hardly say that his experience was pareidolia. Knowing the tragic history of the USS Arizona and the men who died banging on the hull from the inside, waiting for a rescue that would never come, the picture of the man's face in the water might as well be the most convincing proof of ghosts we will ever get, because the reality of how those men died is far more haunting to me than the idea of seeing one of their faces floating in the water 7 years later. Besides, this is hardly the only story about the island being haunted. Sergeant.
Jacobs.
What's going on?
Oh, that's right. You just checked in, didn't you?
What do you mean, Sergeant?
So, nobody's told you yet.
About what?
That this kind of thing happens all the time.
The alarm's going off?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be going inside and...
Nope. You can head back to your post.
Aren't we supposed to clear the building? That's standard protocol, isn't it?
Look, you can go in and clear the building if you want, but you'll get tired of it after the first week. Trust me.
Sorry, Sergeant. Am I missing something?
The alarms go off every night, usually around 0300 to 0330. Don't you get it?
Get what?
Boy, you are green, aren't you? Look, you see how the guards sit in that little shack outside the front door of the building? Now, why would they want to do that instead of sitting inside at the CQ desk in the lobby?
Is there something wrong with the building?
You're damn right there's something wrong with it. Strange noises, smells, you name it.
Sergeant, are you saying that the building is haunted?
Took you that long, didn't it?
Oh, okay. I get it. Prank the new guy, right, Sergeant? Yeah, very funny.
Do I look like I'm laughing?
But...
look, you'll figure it out eventually. Have a good night.
Yes, Sergeant. Have a good night. What the hell? This next account was shared by an Air Force veteran who was stationed at Hickam Air Force Base in the late 1990s. We don't have a name for him, so we'll call him Isaac. Hickam lies adjacent to the naval base at Pearl Harbor, and the two are considered joint bases. As a security specialist, Isaac's job largely revolved around patrolling the central headquarters building. The building itself, it seems, has a very dark history about it. This is one of two experiences that I had while stationed at Hickam Air Force Base as a security specialist on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, in the mid-90s. This incident would occur in 1997. The first day we were processed in, the other troops there started telling us new guys ghost stories. I thought they were just messing with us, until I had been there for a little while. It took all of one shift to start verifying the most prevalent story told on the base. It involves the 12th Air Force Headquarters building being haunted by the war dead of Pearl Harbor. The Pacific Air Force's PACAF command is also located in this building, so it is a very important place that requires strict security. There are manned security posts on the premises, as well as state-of-the-art laser and camera systems blanketing the property. Anyway, a little historical background on the building. During the Japanese attacks on Pearl Harbor, the building was used as a hospital and temporary morgue. Over 1,000 dead servicemen were stored there until their remains could be dealt with properly. Many of them would die in the building while being treated. There was so much blood that the cleanup apparently required stringing hoses throughout the building and washing the floors with scrub brushes. Pretty gruesome. And for sure sets a good stage for some paranormal happenings. Well, the first night on shift, around 3 a.m., the motion alarms went nuts, and the SRT, Special Response Team, was called to respond. I was training with the base patrol that night, so we went that way and provided backup. Every guy there seemed more tense than they should be. Something strange then happened to me. Instead of the SRT going in the building and clearing it, they simply reset the alarm and documented the occurrence. Anyone who knows anything about military security knows this is extremely unusual and not protocol. When we returned to our patrol, I asked my FTO, field training officer, why didn't we secure the building like we should have? This is what he told me. It happens every night, usually between 3 and 3:30. He also let me in on why there was a little shack outside the front door of the building, instead of the guard being posted at the CQ desk in the lobby of HQ. Almost every airman that tried to work the post would refuse to stay in there because they would hear walking and talking, smell what was described as rotten meat or a slaughterhouse smell, and the stairs in front of that location would squeak and vibrate violently on a regular basis. I was still thinking that this was them messing with me. It just seemed like it was a little too scripted, but man, was I wrong. For the next 6 months I was there, this alarm thing would occur each and every night between 3 and 3:30, just like my sergeant warned me. I saw military dogs refuse to go into search. Every dog would whimper, growl, and try to hide behind their handler. Those of you who know know that military working dogs don't refuse service. I also witnessed grown men choose to sit on a stool in a 4x4 foot shack instead of at a nice desk in a spacious air-conditioned lobby, night after night. I quickly became one of those guys in the shack too, because I experienced the walking, talking, and stares in about the first hour of my shift on that post. I tried sitting at the desk, and I didn't stay there long. Because my shift on the HQ post began at midnight, and by 0100 or so, my time of trying to stay at the CQ desk was over. I was pretty shaken. I never experienced the smells, but would experience the sounds on several occasions. Then at 3:17 a.m., the alarm went off. There was motion detected in the basement and on the 3rd floor. There had been nobody there since 5 p.m. when the building had been secured for the evening. Peculiar thing, very seldom did anyone come back in the evening to work there, alone. I think I remember only about 2 times in my 6 months that anyone came back to work after 5 p.m. And if they did, they didn't stay long, in and out, so to speak. It was creepy, and I experienced these things on several occasions, but the alarm thing was every morning, without fail. These are my experiences at the HQ building on Hickam Air Force Base. It was an extremely unnerving place to work. The sheer death toll during the attacks on Pearl Harbor in 1941 are horrifying enough. Hundreds of recovered bodies would have needed a large amount of indoor space to hold them, and the process of identifying them and preparing them for burial must have taken an incredible effort. The dead would have been carried and stored in the buildings closest to the harbor, where the ships were destroyed. As with this airman's account, there does seem to be a common trend around Pearl Harbor installations that buildings or spaces used to house the bodies of the dead are now known to be very unnerving to spend time in. One Navy veteran, using the handle Rare Notice 7417, shared a similarly chilling account about his own building, which is now a commissary on Hickam and is only a short distance from the headquarters building previously mentioned.
My unit's building was supposedly haunted. In the aftermath of the Pearl Harbor attacks, the building was a commissary, a grocery store, and they kept bodies in the freezers. Those freezers ended up becoming storage for our cleaning supplies decades later. And it was weird going in there or staying the night on duty.
Another sailor with the handle Combat Wombat 23 shared something similar in a comment about the Naval Information Operations Quarterdeck building, which is another short distance from the HQ building and lies adjacent to the harbor.
I don't know if it is still the case, but the quarterdeck for NIOC Hawaii is haunted. Whole building was used as a morgue during Pearl Harbor. I had an overnight watch, and it's a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, so it's got big heavy doors and stuff. I was the only person in the secure area that night. Most of the lights were off, and I swear to God, the same door kept opening every time I walked through. And then there was the gym in the tiny-ass basement with low ceilings. Something was not right down there.
Pearl Harbor and Hickam are on the west side of the island. The island isn't very big. You could drive around it in a few hours, depending on traffic. But the naval and air base down near the harbor are hardly the only creepy places on the island. And the events of World War II are possibly not the darkest thing that has happened throughout its history. All right, let's get these targets reset.
Sir, did you see those people there?
Wait, you mean you saw them too?
Yes, sir. Why? I thought everyone was gone.
Yeah, but I thought... Okay, hold up. Range control, come in over. This is Lima 1. Interrogative, is anyone still on the range? Over.
Negative, Lima 1. All packs are accounted for. You should be the only team out there. Over.
Hey, did you guys also see those people?
The ones dressed in black, sprinting like hell across their lights? Yes, sir. Hard to miss them.
Hey, if you guys are Op 4, we gotta get these targets reset.
Corporal.
Yes, sir.
There's no Op 4 out here. There's not supposed to be anybody out here.
Oh.
Whoever's here, this is a restricted area. We are conducting live fire drills. We need you to leave immediately. I don't know why you're even here. We will escort you out if needed, but you need to leave. Now. Hello?
There.
What the hell was that?
Did you guys see that?
Okay, Specialist Myers, take your guys and let's clear these buildings out. We don't have time for this nonsense. Whoever you are, darting around between the buildings, we will remove you if you do not leave. This is your last warning. When speaking about strange happenings on the island of Oahu, the deaths of American servicemen is not the only cited cause. The island, of course, has a history that long predates the adoption of Hawaii as the 50th state. A history of the indigenous people that has both countless wars and paranormal legends. One of note is the Night Marchers. The legend of the Night Marchers begins well before the American occupation of Hawaii. In their language, native Hawaiians would refer to themselves as Kanaka Maoli, or true people. This name distinguishes themselves from the Americans and other foreigners who have migrated to the island over the last century. Still today, tensions exist on the islands, especially Oahu, the same as they always have in other colonized nations. Native Hawaiians are descended from Polynesian peoples, those who migrated over from the Marquesas Islands between sometime around the 4th and 7th centuries. And over the following centuries, warfare was not uncommon in Hawaii. Tribes fought over territory and ruling power. Tribes from one island would frequently invade other nearby islands. Even something seemingly as slight as one tribe disrespecting the honor of another could provoke a bloody conflict. The heart of Hawaii's tribal societies were the chiefs. Unlike many modern political leaders, the chiefs of Hawaiian tribes were frontline warriors, which is probably why they were so respected and revered by their people. During times of peace, the chiefs maintained order over their lands. During times of war, they led their men into battle. And a warrior's fierce loyalty to his chief was so strong, in fact, that it didn't end with his death. According to Native Hawaiians, their devotion to the chief carried over into the afterlife. Legend has it that while the ancient tribes of the Hawaiian Islands are long dead, their spirits remain. Not only can they be seen, but they are often heard. These spirits are known throughout Hawaii as the Night Marchers. But if you thought these entities were something only talked about by the natives, you would be wrong. American soldiers, sailors, and Marines stationed on the island have been sharing stories about them for decades. Sharing his story online, a soldier using the handle Napoleon Was Right recounted a truly bizarre experience he had while stationed at Schofield Barracks. We were doing a live fire exercise on a set of buildings. After a company got done shooting the place up, I headed up there with a small group to reset the targets for the next company attack. As we approached the LMTVs, I saw, in the headlights, numerous figures sprinting between the buildings. should be at full sprint. And it looked like each was holding a red chemolite in their hands. I chalked it up to exhaustion and didn't think much more about it until one of my soldiers got out and said, "Sir, did you see those people there? I thought everyone was gone." That started the heebie-jeebies. I called down on the radio to confirm everyone was off the objective. Everyone was accounted for off the range. Then 4 more of my soldiers got out of the truck and said they saw the same thing. We called a hold on training and cleared the entire area. Never found anyone there. Hawaiian folklore has a lot of specific stories about them, and a lot of guys I know who were stationed in Hawaii saw them in different areas. All describe the same thing I saw. Hey, guys, is there some kind of luau going on or what? Guys? This next story was originally submitted to Nick Orton for publication in the Tales from the Grid Square Project. In it, an anonymous Marine recalls an encounter he had while stationed at Kaneohe Bay. I was stationed in K-Bay not long ago. This happened in 2021. It was a common thing for me and a group of my buddies to go camping on the North Shore, mostly to do some fishing overnight. We had just set up a little before Kaena Point in a spot we frequent often. Up until that point, I had heard the stories of the night marchers and the menehune of the island, and although superstitious myself, I never gave it much thought. The day carried on as usual, and with the night, we eventually started to go into our tents to sleep. At around 0200, I woke up to the sound of marching and drums off in the distance that were getting closer to our campsite. In my mind, I immediately knew what it was. Out of fear, I lay there in my tent, trying not to make a sound and hoping that they would just pass by. Thankfully, the sounds eventually started to grow distant and were soon gone. When I woke up, I just chalked the whole thing up to being a weird dream. The next morning, I didn't mention anything to my friends and started to pack up. But just as we were finishing, an older Hawaiian woman, who I assume was also camping nearby, came over to us and started asking if we heard the marchers last night. Come to find out that where we had set up is a known path for the night marchers to be on. This final story was sent to me a few years back by an H&S. We never had to explain what H&S meant, but for the sake of anybody who's not military, a headquarters and service Marine. Honestly, I never even knew that. We just said H&S. I never bothered to question it, but this final story was sent to me a few years back by an H&S Marine named Ruben. Both I and Ruben spent quite a few nights training on the southeastern end of the island of Oahu on an old decommissioned airbase called Bellows Air Station. We just called it Bellows. I'm not sure when it was last in service, but when I was there between 2010 and 2015, it looked like it had been a while. All there were really just the runways and the mountain towns, the mock Afghani villages that they'd built there. There wasn't really anything else other than just training at Bellows meant our patrols didn't completely suck. No mountains to climb, no falling into ravines, etc. Worst thing that ever happened to me there was when I tried to take a nap one night and a centipede bit my head. Super painful. Doc had to knock me out with Benadryl. But Ruben evidently encountered some things at Bellows that I am happy to say that I missed out on. One thing I didn't know about the base, as many times as I trained there's a cemetery there. Not sure if that matters, but Ruben might think so because of what he saw. I was an H&S guy with a Force Recon unit out of Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. I know what you're thinking. Why are H&S guys going out on recon patrols? They should be pushing paper, right? Well, our ops chief recalled stories of H&S guys hopping on patrols with his team back in Iraq when they were short on bodies, which led him to incorporating us H&S Marines into a lot of the training the reconnaissance Marines were doing. This leads us to the field op in question. We did land navigation all day and went on reconnaissance patrols during the night. The first few nights, we had a team guy with us as a walker, mostly acting as an observer who gave us critiques during the after-action report. But this particular night, the teams were given full autonomy. No instructor shadowing us, just big boy rules. After spending the day doing our land nav, me, being the team's point man, worked with the TL, team leader, to plan that night's patrol route. Our objective was pretty simple. We get dumped at a random spot within the training area and have to conduct a patrol back to our bivouac site, all while avoiding vehicle patrols that were being conducted by Recon Marines and the I&I staff. Our patrol route was submitted and accepted. We started prepping, going through our PPIs. We mounted up into blacked out vans and were driven by one of our SARCs, Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsmen, to the drop point, where we quickly dismounted and established 360-degree security. In true Marine Corps tradition, as soon as I dropped to a knee to cover my sector, I tore a giant hole in the crotch of my camis. I should have known that this was going to set the tone for the rest of the night. The van rolled off, and I glanced at my TL, who gave the hand signal for us to rally up on his position in the tree line. Due to the dense brush in the jungles of Hawaii, we conducted our patrol in a ranger column, which is essentially walking single file with little dispersion. The first quarter of the patrol went well. It wasn't until we crossed one of the large runways that things started to get a little weird. To give some further context, the training area on Bellows Air Base has around 3 to 4 MOUT towns. MOUT stands for Military Operations Urban Terrain. A large X-shaped, what I used to believe was an airstrip, and a dense jungle. We had crossed the airstrip at the southwesternmost point, where one of the smaller MOUT towns made of shipping containers was. Once we re-entered into the tree line, though, my compass began to act weird. I tried looking around, thinking we must have walked too close to some power lines or something, but I didn't see any. I thought my rifle could have been the cause, even though I held it at some distance, and the previous nights I'd never had any issues with it. I probably looked pretty weird to my team, trying to stretch the compass as far away from me as possible while being able to keep an eye on the face of it. The lanyard rope is now, pulling against my collar. Eventually, the needle stopped swaying left and right, and I tried to reorient myself. After our pause rep, position report was completed, I could have sworn, and I still swear to this day, that my TL tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "Go." So I stepped off, following my azimuth. We could faintly hear the sounds of semis and cars on a main road less than a mile away. But by the time I had walked 30 feet back into the jungle, it was dead quiet. And that was when a weird, foreboding feeling washed over me, and I felt a tingle in my temples and around my scalp. I stopped and looked back, hoping to ask my TL if he felt something too, but no one was there. My team wasn't behind me. I was completely alone. what made it worse was that everything was so dark. There was barely any illumination from the moon, and what light there was wasn't able to penetrate the trees, rendering our NVG's, night vision goggles, essentially useless. So throughout the patrol, we were using our natural vision, and I was using the very dim little glow-in-the-dark tritium marker, the light, on my compass to navigate. So a wave of panic sets in as I now realize I had royally screwed up. I had stepped off without my team behind me. And at that moment, that's when I began to hear the voices. They were faint, like the background noise of women and kids talking and playing, mixed in with the occasional male voice. Some bushes began to rustle, so I pocketed my compass and lifted my rifle while slowly backing away. I didn't have any live ammunition, but I was willing to channel whatever warrior spirit I needed to punch the barrel of my weapon into whatever came out of that bush. Eventually, the movement stopped, and I took that moment to quickly turn tail and run back down in the direction I thought I came from. Luckily for me, I saw the pale glow of the moonlight reflecting off the runway that we had crossed from between the trees. I looked north and then south, only to see that I was significantly further north of the mountain town we had passed through. Now I thought I was losing it. There was no way that I covered 300 meters north after I'd stepped off. But in any case, I needed to find my team. So I'm moving in a slow jog while trying to muffle the sound of my steps. I pushed south toward the mountain town, and eventually I found my team, still set up in 360-degree security, and they all turned to face me as I walk up to them. Like any good leader would, my TL then grabs me, pulls me close, and whispered, in an ass-chewing voice, and asked me, "What the hell were you doing? Where did you go?" And I told him about how he had tapped me and told me to go, and he claimed he never did such a thing. He told me that as he was writing down further instructions from the ROC, the Recon Operations Center, that I just got up and walked into the jungle. I think he saw the confusion in my eyes because he just let me go and told me to get my head in the game. We formed up and stepped off together. We came across the same area of jungle that I was in before, still dead quiet. But thankfully, I could hear the steps of my team now behind me, so this time it made me stay focused and not think about what happened before. There were no voices this time, or rustling bushes. Our route led us along the brush to a bridge, the only land crossing in the area. Since the stream itself was out, we'd been warned some guys got a flesh-eating bacteria while crossing the stream, so we said we're not doing that. About 300 meters from the stream, we hit a small trail and ran face first into a massive black building that was directly on my azimuth. I tried to go around it on the right, but the building was still in front of us, so we turned around and tried to go left, but the building was also there. The building was apparently crescent-shaped, with a rounded roof, like a small hangar or bunker, and it had a crescent-shaped road out in front of it. I have looked for this building on the Google Maps imagery, and for the strangest reason, I can't see it. So I don't know if it's just... It was an open air when I saw it, so I don't know if it's been overgrown since then or what, but whatever this building was, we couldn't get around it. So my team leader and I did a map check under our camo tarp using a red light and confirmed our position using a nearby T intersection. Since GPS wasn't allowed during training, we settled on following the trail to the stream, even though it raised our risk of running into another patrol, staying out in the open like that. So with a final look at this strange moon-shaped building, we set off down this trail and get back to where the stream is, which has two parallel roads running on each side of it. So we're moving alongside this very tall grass that is bordering the road, which is bordering the stream, and I see headlights coming path wide open. We got no choice but to just sprint across the road one at a time and then immediately take cover in the tree line on the far side. So one last check for danger. My TL taps me. I nod, and we start crossing one at a time. I sprinted across the bridge and took cover in the trees on the far side. I was then joined by the rest of my team. The team's radio operator then asked to go take a leak. He got permission from the TL. And halfway through, I see headlights coming fast down the road, so I warned the team, and in the dark, this is kind of funny, I watch my TL tackle the radio operator midstream, mind you, to make sure that he's out of sight. And we're all very tense, worried that this van and their headlights are going to catch us. But the truck just passes by and keeps going, so we relaxed again. And now the RO is moaning about something, basically saying that he thinks he scratched his junk on a sharp stick when he got tackled. I mean, we had to laugh. Once the ATL got a radio check, I reset my azimuth and we moved out, and the rest of the patrol was pretty straightforward. After dodging the van again, driving by, we exfilled and returned to the bivouac for debrief. So afterward, I found the guys that were driving around in the van looking for us, and I told them, hey, you guys drove right by us when we were near the stream, and we crossed that bridge, and it was around this time. So, because we were outside the elephant grass, and I did not see anybody walking along the road on the other side, but after the van left, that's when somebody appeared. So I was like, which one of you guys got out of the van to go take a leak or something? Because I was looking for you with my nods, and I didn't see you. And all these guys had no idea what I was talking about. They said that nobody ever got out of the van, and there shouldn't have been anybody else walking around the training area except us. So, who was the guy that we saw? And moreover, who was it that tapped my shoulder if it wasn't my TL? That was one of the creepiest patrols I've ever been on. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for the after action here in the credits. Oh boy, this episode, because I spent several years stationed in Hawaii at Kaneohe Bay, brought up a lot of memories for me. Of all the climes and places a soldier could find himself fighting in combat, few are as challenging or nightmarish as the jungle. The oppressive heat during the dry season can sap a man of his strength, while the humid air and heavy rainfall in the wet season can, in equal measure, break the spirit of even the toughest men. Jungle rot, rashes, heat stroke, and other such frustrations aside, the impenetrable walls of jungle foliage serve to make both navigation and radio communication difficult. If all that wasn't enough to contend with, the jungle hosts an array of toxic, aggressive, and terrifying wildlife. Then, of course, there's the enemy. Its traps, encampments, and ambushes laying in wait, perfectly concealed to the eyes of an unsuspecting and weary patrol. Serving as a soldier in such an environment is an unenviable line of work, but few men are as proficient and effective in jungle operations as the elite Philippine Army Scout Rangers. Tasked with fighting various insurgent groups in the southern islands of their homeland for over 70 years, there are few perils within the jungle depths that these men aren't comfortably familiar with. Formidable and cool-headed as they are, however, even from the ranks of these seasoned, highly capable men come whispers of something nefarious lurking in the jungle. An ancient evil that any Filipino has known of since childhood. Something with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. An aswang. The mist which hangs before you offers you a choice: to pass through or to escape. Beyond it are stories
mysteries,
which defy
the explanation
and fly in the face
of what we know to be real.
It is a void of both
reality
and impossibility,
Of both fact and
superstition.
You alone are left to discern
what to believe as you pass through what we call fog of war.
Hey guys, as you may remember, I recently announced the launch of my new podcast called Redacted Declassified Mysteries, which you can listen to anywhere you get your podcasts. It's right here. Hit that subscribe. And the secret RSS fully and to
Nagkakaroon kami ng putok ng baril mula sa lupa. Maglikod sa kaliwa.
In the early years of the 21st century, the southern Philippines still found itself embroiled in the long, drawn-out war dubbed the Moro conflict. Largely centralized in the Mindanao region of the Philippines, the war, raging since 1968, pitted Muslim nationalist groups against the armed forces of the Philippines. The conflict in and of itself was seen by the native Bangsamoro Muslim people as yet another fight on the road to national independence. Chief amongst these groups were the Moro National Liberation Front and Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Moving into the 1990s, however, fundamentalist jihadist groups started to take root in the war-torn southern islands. While generally smaller in number than their nationalist counterparts, these groups, namely Abu Sayyaf, were of great concern to both federal and separatist forces. With the Moro conflict largely taking place within the impregnable jungles of the southern Philippines, a specialized force was needed to root out the insurgents. Enter the Philippine Army's 1st Scout Ranger Regiment. Founded in 1950, the Scout Rangers had firmly established themselves among the Army's top-tier units, with specialties in counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, hostage rescue, and of course, jungle warfare. The Scout Rangers spearheaded many federal operations. Their reputation as stout warfighters has earned them the respect of friend and foe alike. With the war now bleeding into the early 2000s, the time our story takes place, the Scout Rangers found themselves deployed to the province of Sulu in order to counter the growing presence of Abu Sayyaf in the region. Having been at war for well over 30 years, by 2001, the Philippine Armed Forces were generally overstretched and under-resourced. Building their forward outposts with what few resources they had to hand, we find that the patrol base established in the Pitikul municipality of Sulu is little more than a collection of squat structures made of wood and tin. The large perimeter encompassing the otherwise tiny base was nothing more than a haphazardly constructed low wall, consisting of sandbags and barbed wire. Housed within, 18 Scout Rangers, including their commanding officer, are in charge of patrolling an entire municipality with little in the way of fire or air support. In spite of their humbling conditions, these men are clearly skilled at doing more with less. However, despite the warfighting capabilities of the Scout Rangers, even the most inexperienced insurgents could see that the base was a soft target for a coordinated assault. The Scout Rangers were also wise to this. As resourceful as they were, ingenuity can only take a fighting force so far, when desperately needed resources and logistics are sorely lacking. Because of their scant perimeter defense, the Scout Rangers, much to their chagrin, found themselves conducting heightened patrols of the grounds of their compound. Again, in spite of their combat proficiency, it was no less a taxing position to be in. The Scouts felt like sitting ducks, knowing that the enemy was likely watching their every move. And one night, as the sun set over the island, 8 Scout Rangers mustered in preparation for yet another routine walk around the perimeter. That number was quickly reduced to 7 when one of the men, having drank some tainted water, found himself guarding the latrine for the better part of the night. Undermanned and undersupplied, the remaining Scout Rangers then set out on their evening walk, what would soon become a highly eventful night. Perfectly concealed in the jungle beyond the wire, the ASG militants peppered the scout rangers with small arms fire, wounding their point man, sending him sprawling to the ground. The other rangers reacted quickly, ducking for cover and establishing fire superiority over the camouflaged fighters, firing back at any muzzle flashes now appearing in the pitch-black jungle. Roused from their sleep by the gunfire, the other scouts now joined in the defense of their base. After a few minutes of sustained fire from both sides, the Abu Sayyaf fighters fell silent, likely retreating back into the comparative safety of the jungle. A typical hit-and-run ambush. With bullets no longer flying, the Rangers then quickly moved to offer medical aid to their wounded point man. It became quickly apparent that he was in grave condition. The round that struck the point man had torn straight through his upper right thigh, severing the femoral artery. With no major facilities to hand at their small outpost, the Scout Rangers knew that their friends' only hope was a medevac airlift to the nearest field hospital. Radioing up a report before loading the wounded man onto a stretcher, while a new patrol was sent to guard the perimeter for any further attack, the first team withdrew to a spot 300 meters inside the wire, setting up an improvised landing zone and triage just outside a cluster of jungle trees. Despite their best efforts to stem the bleeding, their friend's condition rapidly deteriorated. He gradually slipped into unconsciousness due to blood loss. With their patrol base being in such a remote area of operations, the helicopter was, tragically, still hours away. As they waited, staring out into the dark, they prayed that no further ambushes would take place. One wounded man was bad enough. On this particular night, however, the jungle would not relent. As he lay dying, with the smell of his blood now on the air, the wounded man would garner the attention of something much worse than the Abu Sayyaf. Some time had passed, and the night skies were still distressingly quiet. Unable to abandon their fallen brother, the Rangers remained alert, their attention focused outward, hoping to keep the LZ perimeter secured. Unbeknownst to the men, however, something was already inside the perimeter. The movement was subtle at first, masked by the tall grass in the field bordering the looming patch of jungle behind the Rangers. The medic, nearest to the body of their fallen comrade, was the first to notice. Casting the dim beam of his rifle-mounted flashlight towards the man, now covered in a blanket, he saw that something had coiled itself around the man's legs. Slowly but surely, something appeared to be dragging the wounded man closer and closer to the tree line. His look of confusion turned to one of horror as the medic realized that what was coiled around the man's legs wasn't a snake. Maroon-colored and coated with a foul-smelling layer of mucus, what he was staring at was a grotesquely long tongue. Its owner, hidden in the darkness of the jungle, was clearly attempting to make a meal out of their fallen comrade. Now alerted to the bizarre situation, in the ensuing confusion, the Rangers had first thought the medic had seen some indication of a person hiding in the tree line behind them, while issuing verbal warnings to whoever was in the jungle, unsure of how they had just managed to tie what appeared to be a slime-covered rope around their friend's legs. The Rangers attempted to prevent him from being dragged any further into the brush. Slashing and stabbing it with their bayonets, with the soft ground underneath of it giving way, the Rangers found that the unknown material was seemingly impervious to being cut. Though it appeared slick and organic, its hypertensile strength was clearly incredible. Unsuccessful in their attempts to cut or remove it from his legs, their friend being dragged closer and closer to the jungle, the Rangers then gave up on shouting any more warnings and let loose with their weapons. The bullets quickly chewed through the dense jungle foliage, but but by the time their magazines ran dry, the scouts realized that whoever or whatever this was, it had no intention of letting go of its prey. His body soon to disappear through the brush line, with blades and bullets proving ineffective against the unseen threat. The Scout Rangers resorted to one final, drastic measure. The explosions of 2 grenades echoed through the night, slightly muffled by the jungle undergrowth. This, finally, seemed to ward off the mysterious assailant, the strange appendage immediately uncoiling itself from around their comrade's legs before hastily being drawn back into the jungle. Shaken and on edge, still believing this was some kind of enemy attack, the Scout Rangers were certain that the enemy would open fire at any moment. After a long period of tense silence, however, it seemed that the Rangers were now alone. Their attention now drawn to the sound of an incoming helicopter, the medic realized that, sadly, their friend had already succumbed to his injuries. The long-awaited medevac chopper had arrived, only to now transport the lifeless body of the fallen Scout Ranger. With dawn fast approaching, the remaining 6 men returned to the compound, eager to relay the specifics of what they'd encountered to their commanding officer. While the after-action reports written by their captain covered the perimeter ambush and subsequent casualty in great detail, the strange ordeal that took place at the improvised landing zone was ultimately omitted. Some of the Rangers, as odd as the situation was, felt confident in some sort of rational explanation, determined to believe it was a snake or some unknown insurgents. Others, however, knew what they had seen. They could not shake the thought that they had encountered something truly unnatural, something that was clearly not a myth. An Aswang. On a pragmatic level, an encounter with an unusually brazen python seems to be the only viable substitute for what was described in this account. In the dead of night, with what he described as dim, weapon-mounted flashlights to cut through the darkness, their nerves rattled by recent combat, could the tongue, described by the Rangers, simply have been just that? To further cement this theory, reticulated pythons, among other large snakes, have been known to drag their prey to concealed dens before eating. Perhaps, feeling exposed in the open field, the snake attempted to drag the body into the jungle before the Rangers cut its plans short. There are, however, clearly elements in this theory that don't quite add up, namely with regard to the physical characteristics of the creature, namely its tongue, as relayed by the scout who witnessed the event. Surely the Scout Rangers, well-trained and versed in all the natural perils of the jungle, would be able to quickly identify such a distinct animal. Whatever this was bore a distinct maroon color, unlike any known python, and was reportedly covered in a viscous layer similar to mucus or saliva. Concerningly still, the material, or flesh that this thing was composed of, was apparently impervious to bayonets. In fact, the only thing that seemed to ward off the unknown creature was the use of fragmentation grenades. Eerily enough, it is said that one of the few ways one can effectively fend off an Aswang attack is through the use of fire or extreme heat. In Philippine folklore, the length of the Aswang's tongue can vary in descriptions, but as described by the Scout Ranger who shared this story, it is often depicted as being unnaturally long, enabling the creature to reach its victims from a distance. Other stories and accounts describe the Aswang's tongue as extending significantly beyond what would be considered normal for a human or animal tongue. This allows the creature to reach into houses or even climb under roofs to access its prey. Pregnant women in particular should be wary of this beast, as it has a particular taste for unborn children. On that note, we come to our second story, another reported encounter that soldiers serving in the Scout Rangers had with a similar creature, only this time it was the northern region of the Philippines, far from Mindanao.
So how you been, brother? It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah. It's I'm doing good.
How was work?
It's all right. Probably not as exciting as what you've been doing.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you when you're gonna join the army, eh?
No.
I think you would be really good at it.
The army is your thing, brother. I like my nice quiet job fixing cell phone towers.
1 Lima, this is Hotel Charlie. Come in, over.
I don't think.
Hold on, 1 second. Sorry. This is 1 Lima. Send it over.
Roger that. We have a possible tango about 5 mics in your current pause. Threatening locals. Can you go check it out? Over.
Interrogative. You think he's NPA? Over.
Roger. Possible Bravo situation. He's up on the roof of a house. Gonna need here on site. Over.
Okay. We're heading over there now. Over.
Everything okay?
Sorry, bro. I gotta take this. We're the only unit in the area. Just tag along. This should be fun.
Okay.
For such a relatively small country, the number of socio-political issues and armed insurgencies in the Philippines is staggering. It's no wonder their armed forces are often stretched thin and run ragged. Not only are there fundamentalist jihadist groups operating throughout the southern region, but this next story enlightens us to the fact that pro-communist groups operate throughout the island nation as well. Coming into existence alongside other militant groups, the New People's Army, the NPA, founded in 1969, has long maintained their goal to overthrow the Philippine government through a protracted people's war. Over the decades, shared anti-government sentiments have occasionally led to alliances between the NPA and Islamist groups. Despite their occasional cooperation, ideological differences and conflicting goals often lead to tensions and even violent clashes between the different armed groups, particularly in Mindanao. So saying, while their areas of operation do tend to overlap in southern regions, like Mindanao, the NPA is also known to conduct its operations in the north, on the islands of Luzon and Visayas. Like their Islamist counterparts, the NPA typically operates in remote and less accessible regions, such as mountainous terrain, dense jungles, and hinterlands. These areas offer natural cover and make it difficult for government forces to conduct effective military operations. This next story was shared by a Filipino man, a civilian, who, because of the dangers in the area he was called to repair a cell phone tower, was accompanied by the Scout Rangers while visiting a remote village. He was worried about running into communist NPA fighters, but evidently he and the soldiers encountered something far worse. He writes, "Out of all my paranormal experiences, this is probably the most compelling I had, simply because I was not alone when this happened, and I was not with just the average kind of people either. I'll put in as much details exactly as I remember them. To protect the persons involved, I will change their names. I also cannot state the name of my company, but it is one of the largest telecommunication companies in the Philippines, which is synonymous to world. I currently work as one of the senior IT network and server engineers there. I usually get assigned to work on priority repairs on various cell sites and server data center sites, mostly in far-flung provinces. This happened in mid-December 2016 in Nueva Vizcaya, a mountainous province in the northern region of the Philippines. It was a priority service call, Severity 1, the highest of priorities where even the CEO of the company receives status updates. Since the cell site in question also services various military communications devices. As soon as I got to the office, I was dispatched immediately, carrying with me the various equipment to replace the existing ones at the cell site. It was a 6-hour drive north of Manila. I was asked to go to a specific meeting point in the town nearest the cell site to rendezvous with my escort, an 8-member team from the Philippines 1st Army Scout Ranger Regiment. The area of the cell site is a place where the local communist movement, the New People's Army, NPA, is highly active. And apparently the NPA carried out an operation earlier in the morning of that day, which is what caused some of the equipment to be damaged. The scout team was actually led by one of my former high school classmates. I'll call him Lieutenant Ramirez. He specifically asked for me, knowing that I worked for the telco. He had his men transfer the equipment to their truck, and we began to travel to the cell site. It was already dark by this time. I also, during the long uphill ride, First Lieutenant Ramirez and I did some catching up when they received a call. I don't understand military speak, so I could not tell exactly what was being talked about, but he updated us accordingly, saying that a village on the way to the cell site requested assistance with a possible NPA member harassing a household. Apparently the man was up on the roof of this house and he was still in the area. Being the nearest, First Lieutenant Ramirez responded that his team will be handling it. So instead of continuing to the damaged tower, we drove towards the village mentioned, now with our headlights turned off. The countryside, especially the poorer places, are very dark. Soldiers aren't allowed to smoke at night in places like this, since the light from their cigarettes could be clearly seen, even from a distance, giving away their position. It was that dark here. I was hesitant to be riding along, since I'm not exactly a soldier, but Ramirez brushed it off, saying it would be a good chance for me to become a soldier for at least one night. First Lieutenant Ramirez, I can say, is a battle-hardened junior officer. He's been to a number of dangerous situations before, fighting in many encounters, both high-profile and low-key. He's the type to jump in quickly, then ask questions later. That's how he's been ever since we've been kids. Very cocky individual, but not entirely without cause. He did receive a medal recently, after all, although I wasn't sure for what action. Either way, we're going in. It's part of the job, he casually said to me. Now, you have to understand, the Philippine Army usually does the police work in the areas where communists, Muslim insurgents, or bandits are active. And when you send in the scouts, the best the military has to offer, you can get an idea of how bad the situation is in the place that they're being sent. Even other countries recognize the abilities of the Philippine Scout Rangers. All the more so in this case, since the scouts came from the 1st Regiment. They're the best the scouts have to offer, from what I've been made to understand. Anyway, we get to the place, maybe 5 minutes later, with me still having second thoughts, and Ramirez looks at me and he says, "Dude, make up your mind. Either you shadow me, or I leave you in the truck. If you stay here, you're free dinner for them commies, though. I can't spare a babysitter for this one." So he made the choice easier for me. I had no plans of being abducted that night, and I was pissing myself already. I'm not cut out for this danger stuff. I just wanted to repair the cell site and go home. I wished he had never taken me, and I was wishing I had never ended up in this situation, and I plan to get his wife to kick his ass once he goes home on vacation for this. "Here," he said, handing me a loaded 9mm pistol and 2 clips. He goes, "I know you're used to this one. Safety's on." I sat there thinking, I am not getting paid enough for this job. And I recalled my company insurance policy doesn't even cover sports-related injuries, let alone firearms-related ones. I didn't have time to waste, so I stuck with my friend instead of waiting in the truck for someone to drag me into the woods and hold me for ransom, which nobody's going to pay for. The plan was for 6 of his men to break off into 3 pairs to surround the house in question. Me, First Lieutenant Ramirez, and his sniper, PFC, Santiago, were going to go up to this water tower about 50 to 60 meters out. I guess he had planned to snipe the guy and have his men stand by on the ground in case the sniper missed. As we moved to the water tower, he was telling me, "You're too stiff. You're wearing dark clothes. No one will see you. Be in and out 10 minutes tops. You're a VIP. That's why I came and had my sergeant stay with the platoon at the cell site." I didn't know VIPs had to join in responding to these types of calls, but the tower. PFC Santiago immediately positions himself, and First Lieutenant Ramirez sat beside him while I positioned myself behind them. And I was thinking, yeah, this wasn't so bad. I'm far from the area and pretty safe as far as I could tell. Until PFC Santiago said, "Sir, you need to see this." First Lieutenant Ramirez brought out some type of binoculars. I guess they call them night vision scopes. I couldn't see his reaction because it was dark, but he was silent as he put down the binoculars. He swears under his breath. He then turns to me and asks me to look in the direction, and he pointed and asked me to tell him what I see. Of course, my initial concern is that there were more NPA soldiers and that we were outnumbered. A reaction like this from a seasoned scout didn't exactly paint a nice picture in my mind. But what I saw was definitely something that will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. PFC Santiago said, "Sir, orders." My friend gave the order to put 2 in its head. I think the first shot hit its mark because a scream then echoed through the valley. It sounded like a mix of a high-pitched male shout and a cornered or dying animal's cry. Not sure how to describe it because it was the first time I had heard such a sound, but I am sure all of us heard it because of how loud the sound was. Santiago never got off a second shot. I don't know if he did so on purpose or if he was caught off guard by the scream. We then heard audible Santiago had shot. And while he didn't get a good look at the thing, his attacker, due to the darkness, he specifically refused to call the thing human. I noticed even his buddy seemed to indicate that he didn't think it was human at all. The other 4 soldiers come back over to us, saying that whatever this thing was, it got away. My friend decided to talk to the people in the house. We found out that a young couple lived in this house and that the woman was 7 months pregnant. They were the ones who had texted their local village official, who in turn requested the military to check on the situation since he suspected this thing was an NPA soldier. The 3 of us, me, First Lieutenant Ramirez, and PFC Santiago, never told anyone, even this couple, what we saw that night. We simply stated it was a machete-swinging communist trying to rob them. NPAs were known to resort to banditry, so they believed it. We eventually made our way to the cell site, where I immediately began to do the necessary repairs. I was eavesdropping as I was working, and I heard Ramirez and Santiago stick to their story when they were asked by the rest of their platoon regarding the recent encounter, but they never mentioned anything about the man's description, nor the strange animal sound that we heard. After working an all-nighter and making sure the cell site operation was stable, Ramirez and his men, minus the injured one, took me back to the town where I'd parked my car as soon as daybreak came. As his men loaded the damaged equipment that I'd replaced into my car, Ramirez came to talk to me. At first he was joking around, saying I could probably enlist in the regular army now that I'd had my first-hand experience of what it was like for them. And I went along with this, hoping to forget about the strange incident. But before I was able to drive away, he said, "Dude, Santiago, we saw the same thing you did. You know what it was, don't you?" I never responded, but inside, I knew what he was talking about. The aswang, a creature from Filipino folklore, the stuff of a Filipino child's nightmares. The description, the sound, it was the only thing that made sense, explaining what that thing was. During the Spanish era, 1500s to about 1890, these creatures were said to be once human, who were blessed by the moon priestess of old called Babylon. So these people could have power to fight the Spanish colonizers who had done them wrong. The Spaniards decided to persecute these priestesses for witchcraft, then spread tales that aswangs attacked locals and foreigners alike. The aswang is a creature said to be able to shapeshift into either a human or an animal, but is never able to correctly imitate one or the other. As a human, it has leathery black skin and disproportioned limbs. As an animal, like a dog or a cat, for example, it's always black and 3 times the normal size. It can never speak or do animal calls. It can only growl, shout, or scream. They usually eat the flesh of recently deceased humans and animals, but also have a preference of targeting very ill people or pregnant women. Pregnant women like the one that was in the village. They can never become human again, and being an aswang is hereditary. No one will turn if attacked by one, although the wounds they inflict can be fatal. This is, of course, all true if the folklore is to be believed. I've never been back to the general area after this. First Lieutenant Ramirez and his whole team were recently dispatched to the south to deal with the ISIS terrorists there. And before he left, before writing this, I asked him about that night. It's hard to imagine a soldier of his caliber believing in those kinds of tales, and I find it even harder as I write this to believe what I saw was real. But no matter how hard I try to come up with an explanation, I couldn't come up with anything else other than the legend passed down, by our forefathers. One of the last things Ramirez said to me was, "I told you before, course, speculate about what was seen by the Scout Rangers that night back in 2001, or this story from 2016. As indicated by the telecom engineer, what's not up for debate is the conviction of many Filipinos who, to this day, maintain their belief in the existence of the aswang. In fact, drawing on the stout belief in such folklore, the CIA, in an effort to combat communist-aligned Huck guerrillas in the 1950s, staged an aswang vampire attack in order to rid the region of its local insurgency. Reportedly, this operation was a resounding success. The Hucks, coming upon the body of one of their own men, terrified to find his corpse completely drained of blood and with 2 distinct bite marks on his neck, they practically fled the area overnight. In the modern era, certain rituals meant to ward off any malevolent aswang are still prevalent, even amongst those who don't necessarily believe in their existence. For instance, if a loved one's body is to be removed from a home following their passing, it's advised that the homeowners refrain from sweeping the front porch. It is thought that the action of sweeping spreads the scent of death far and wide, possibly attracting the attention of lingering ghouls. Likewise, the color red, symbolic of positive energy and good fortune in Filipino culture, is commonly worn by young children and orphans as a sort of shield against any nearby malevolent forces. As for the Scout Rangers, from 2001 on, they continued to clash with various militant groups all over the southern regions of their homeland. It was only in 2019, after nearly 51 years of constant fighting and over 100,000 lives lost, that peace has finally settled for Mindanao. While the major separatist groups disbanded, small cells of radical Islamists, often affiliated with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, continued to fester in the remote regions of the Philippines. And so, the Philippine Army's elite 1st Scout Ranger Regiment continues to lead the charge into these jungled regions, further building upon their renowned expertise in counter-terror operations. Whatever human enemy they might face, however, according to this Ranger's testimony, it is far from being the most terrifying presence prowling in the jungle. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around here for the after action and credits. This episode was first released as an exclusive on the podcast, and so I've had some time over the past few months before it actually became a YouTube episode to ask people that I've met, specifically wherever a soldier happens to be deployed, aside from the dangers of combat, they'll come to find that the new and unfamiliar environment itself plays a pivotal role in defining the experience. While there are plenty of temperate corners of the globe whose natural elements make for comfortable outdoor living, military personnel are more often expected to live and fight in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. Ask any soldier who's deployed to Iraq, and they'll tell you about the blistering dry heat and massive blinding sandstorms, or the soldiers in Vietnam who have nothing nice to say about its climate. Likewise, the sailors and Marines who have found themselves stationed throughout Asia and the Pacific, like myself, can attest to the many frustrations presented by operating in the jungle. The humidity, the torrential downpours, the dense undergrowth, and we cannot forget the bugs. Having never traveled to Asia prior to enlisting, I honestly never knew mosquitoes and centipedes could get so big. And then there were the spiders. There was nothing like walking through the jungle in the pitch dark at night and putting your face through a cobweb that actually pushes you back, like walking into a literal net. And then you feel something with long, spindly legs crawling across the back of your neck. But after some research, it seems that my collective experiences with giant venomous banana spiders, orb weavers, huntsmans, and the like are nothing compared to some of the arachnids other men have encountered. 8-legged creatures that eat not only cats and other small animals, but purportedly humans. From the equatorial jungles of Africa and Asia to the deserts of the Middle East, these are true stories of military encounters with unbelievably massive spiders. The mist which hangs before you
offers you a choice
to pass through
or to escape.
Beyond it are
stories
which defy
the explanation
and fly in the face
of what we know to be real.
It is a void of both reality and impossibility,
Of both fact and superstition.
You alone are left to discern
what to believe as you pass through what we call fog of war.
Towards the end of the 19th century, the African nation of the Congo found itself in the clutches of the Belgian government. Ironically dubbed the Congo Free State, the country was, in reality, under the private ownership of King Leopold II. Under the guise of bringing humanitarian aid and economic opportunities to the developing nation, Leopold instead sought to exploit the Congolese people and their land, laying claim to most of the Congo Basin in 1885. Within its seemingly endless expanse of lush jungles lay vast amounts of valuable natural resources, such as ivory, palm oil, and rubber, all of which the Belgian monarch was eager to cash in on. As the Congo Free State was not yet a formal Belgian colony, its people were not subject to the protective laws and labor regulations of the European state. And so, under the private jurisdiction of Leopold II and his appointed European overseers, the Congolese people were forced to work, often at gunpoint, on the numerous plantations sprouting up all over the country. Enforcing Leopold's will was the Force Publique, a paramilitary faction whose ranks consisted of mercenaries from all over Africa, led by European officers. Through sheer brutality, these soldiers kept the population in line. The force was also chiefly responsible for defending Leopold's Congolese assets from any territorial rivals seeking to muscle their way into the monarch's business enterprise. With Arab slave traders establishing themselves in the region during the early 1890s, the Force Publique was mustered to push them out. During the conflict, which spanned from 1892 to 1894, many armed patrols would be dispatched into the jungles, their objective being to eliminate Arab encampments and shut down their human trafficking operations. So the story goes, perhaps during one such mission, one of these many Belgian patrols would fail to return. They had mysteriously vanished. For many days after their departure, nothing was seen or heard from the well-armed company of men, likely sparking much concern amongst the Force Publique senior officers. But eventually, and much to the surprise of their leaders, two of the company's men would finally emerge from the jungle, badly dehydrated and clearly driven to the brink of insanity by fear. The two soldiers consisted of a young African mercenary and a Belgian officer by the name of Remy Janssen. When questioned by their superiors, they are reported to have relayed a horrifying and unbelievable story. It would have been easier for their commanding officers to simply presume they had fled from battle in an act of cowardice, or even murdered the rest of their company to cover their crime of desertion. But considering this story still circulates today, if it is derived from an actual military report, perhaps it was so incredible that the Belgian officers could not possibly believe these two men, cowards or not, would have fabricated such a ridiculously far-fetched story if it wasn't true. According to these two crazed men, there was something far more terrifying than enemy soldiers lurking in the jungle depths. Something that had attacked their patrol and had eaten their companions. days, they aimlessly wandered the jungle depths, many wounded men soon succumbing to infections and heat exhaustion brought on by the unrelenting humidity. The rest marched on, hoping to find a river, road, or anything that would lead them back out of this godforsaken jungle and back to their camp. One afternoon, as they stopped to rest, the jungle around them suddenly fell eerily silent, and their situation suddenly got much worse. Emerging from the jungle underbrush came spiders. Spiders with bodies the size of large dogs, their leg spans reaching up to 5 feet across. The creatures now swarmed the petrified soldiers, knocking men to the ground, sinking venomous fangs into them, and then dragging them kicking and screaming back into the underbrush, or even up nearby tree trunks, disappearing high into the branches. Panicked gunfire filled the jungle, the swift spiders outpacing even the men who tried to run, often being tripped by vines and brush. Watching as the men around him were carried away or mauled on the spot by what seemed like hundreds of these massive spiders, in understandable terror, the officer who later recounted this story likewise broke rank and fled into the jungle, managing to escape. The screams of his fellow soldiers carried on, but eventually became muffled as Lieutenant Jansen stumbled deeper into the jungle. Jansen and the one other surviving soldier would be the only men in the company to make it out alive. To their European superiors, the account of the giant spiders certainly must have appeared to be the ramblings of two crazed men, driven mad by both combat and the hostile jungle terrain, perhaps the result of heat stroke and hallucinations. However, when the story was imparted to the native Congolese people, they were unsurprised. The men's seemingly fantastic story carried with it an unnerving degree of truth. They said the Belgian troops must have trespassed on sacred grounds, those belonging to one of the Congo's most elusive and terrifying predators, the Jabophofi. Also referred to as the giant Congolese spider, Jabophofi, similar in appearance to a tarantula, would far exceed the size and human terror of any known spider species. With a leg span reported to be anywhere from 3 to 6 feet in length, these spiders, armed with speed, strength, and potent venom, are said to dwell in concealed huts consisting of webbing and leaves. As for diet, the Jabophofi are said to hunt small mammals, birds, and according to legend, even humans, who are unfortunate enough to cross their path. The spider, said to be now rarely seen due to a habitat loss and a decline in available prey, is still rumored to stalk the deepest, unexplored depths of the Congo's vast jungles. Regrettably, or perhaps more fortunately for the rest of us, it is only these rumors and bits of local folklore that stand testament to the Jabophofi's existence. Even documented military records detailing the Force Publique's troop movements and operations conducted during the Free State era are hard to come by, making Lieutenant Remy Jansen's account of the doomed patrol nearly impossible to verify. As it stands, like all fantastic tales of the strange and unexplained, wherever this story was originally derived from, it has clearly fallen prey to alterations and mistellings. If one were to research Remy Jansen's story, they would more often find an account of a Belgian officer fighting, not in Congo in the 1890s, but in Vietnam, 80 years later. This version of the story does otherwise say that while in Vietnam during the 1970s, the Belgian officer witnessed his men being swarmed and killed by hundreds of large spiders as they attempted to evade slave trading gangs in the remote jungle. This, however, would make no sense historically. Belgian troops have never been deployed to Vietnam in any capacity in known history, nor are there any reports from American, Vietnamese, or other forces during the Vietnam War about encountering Belgian troops or slave trading gangs. So saying, given that the Belgian forces did war against Arab slave traders in Congo during the early 1890s, it is then perhaps safe to assume that if this story truly came from a Belgian officer, it more than likely surfaced in the Congo Free State during the years of King Leopold II's occupation. Now, more than 120 years later, it would be no surprise then that the story has become convoluted through various retellings, and perhaps we might assume that even the spiders got bigger story that remained consistent, because even today, the Congolese people, namely the Baka communities, maintain their belief in and fear of the Jabafofi. And unlike us, these people are not living far-flung from the jungles where these spiders are said to dwell. These are people who are presently continuing to survive as hunter-gatherers, explore these jungles every day,